Hey, everybody. Welcome. Glad to be here with you tonight. We're going to have a great late night conversation. Let's go. Oh, hold on. Hold on. Technical difficulties. Hold on. Much better. Thank you, everybody. Now we are in a much better place. And now we can.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything is all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the tech.
People.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
All right, folks, buckle in because I am going to hit you with some important stuff tonight. We are going to go over some very important content tonight. I got a lot to say to you all. It's interesting. Sometimes I just get on here and I talk about the news, what I'm talking about the news. Sometimes I get on here and I make some kind of point about anti-imperialism. And this is one of those nights where we're gonna talk about some very hard-hitting issues. And it's a risk. It's honestly a bit of a risk for me to get up on here and talk about hard-hitting issues the way I do. But it needs to be done. And I wouldn't be true to myself if I didn't talk about these issues the way I do. So buckle in for tonight. It's going to be a fun ride. We are going to talk about art and culture and U.S. history and the movement we need to build and how to defeat imperialism. And so it's going to be an interesting ride. So for those of you who may not be familiar, just real quick, the way we do these streams is I first give my opening remarks. And then from there, we do a roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, I answer your super chat questions. or your Rumble rant questions for the rest of the night. I see we already have a Rumble rant from Hemp Car. There we go. It's a Rumble rant from Hemp Car, and I will answer any super chats that people have. That's what we're here to do. If folks can, if they can, ask some good questions tonight and buckle your seatbelt. We do the morning messages on the CPI YouTube channel. If people want to submit a morning message, that would be a great place to start. But yeah, I guess we'll just jump into it. So first opening remarks, then roll call, then I answer your questions. Folks, if you are familiar with this YouTube channel and with my rhetoric, you will all know that I am very fond of pointing out the origins of a very American fictional character. He lives as mild-mannered reporter Clark Kent, but he's actually born on another planet. He comes from humble Smallville, Kansas, and whenever danger arises, he runs to the nearest phone booth and changes into his wild costume with a cape and flies into action. Faster than a speeding bullet, faster than a locomotive, able to leap a tall building in a single bound. Look up, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. And I've pointed out that not only is this cultural icon, this fictional character invented in 1938 by two comic book writers in Cleveland, Ohio, not only is Superman a very American cultural icon, superheroes as a genre are identified with American culture and American media around the world, but Superman is progressive. Superman fought the Ku Klux Klan. Superman fought for labor unions and workers' rights. Lex Luthor, the villain, is a maniacally evil capitalist who's always scheming against the people. And Superman defends the people of Metropolis, against this ruthless techno-fascist who's trying to suppress them and scheme against them and harm them in order to advance his own profits. And while it may seem like a coincidence now in the year of 2024, it was no coincidence that in 1938, Superman took on the name Man of Steel, which you all know how one says the phrase Man of Steel in Russian. Stalin. Superman called himself Stalin. And the fact that he went around opposing racism, the fact that he fought against the Nazis, the fact that he fought for labor unions, the fact that he battled against a ruthless, maniacal, technocratic fascist, the fact that he fought against the Ku Klux Klan, all of that points to Superman being a progressive, being somebody who would have fit in pretty well with the Communist Party of the United States. But Superman doesn't fit exactly what we think of when we think of a communist. Superman doesn't like violence. Superman is humble and mild-mannered. He's from the wholesome Midwestern state of Kansas. Superman's a very humble guy. Doesn't want to be famous. He could rule the entire world, but he doesn't. Superman is a lot of things that we don't associate with communism and socialism in our time, but which would have fit in very, very well with the Communist Party of that era. Folks, I want to show you 2 clips of film. I think I've shown both of these on this stream previously, but I'm going to show them both right now because there may be people who are watching this for the first time, and I want them to see this. This first one, this was an official speech by the Vice President of the United States, Henry Wallace. This was a World War II speech called The Century for the Common Man that was made into a short film that was shown to all the soldiers during World War II. The Vice President of the United States gave this speech during the fight against Hitler, when the USA was aligned with China and Russia against fascism, when we had a president who had met with Communist Party members at the White House. We had a Vice President, Henry Wallace, who had once been a member of the Socialist Party, who had been the Secretary of Agriculture, and he gave this very powerful speech during World War II.
We who in a formal or an informal way represent most of the free peoples of the world are met here tonight in the interest of the millions in all the nations who have freedom in their souls, to let those millions in the other countries know that here in the United States are 130 million men, women, and children who are in this war to the finish. Our American people are utterly resolved to go on until they can strike the relentless blows that will assure a complete victory, and with it win a new day for the lovers of freedom everywhere on this earth. This is a fight between a slave world and a free world. Just as the United States in 1862 could not remain half slave and half free, so in 1942 the world must make its decision for a complete victory one way or the other. Down the years, the people of the United States have moved steadily forward in the practice of democracy. When the freedom-loving people march, when the farmers have an opportunity to buy land at reasonable prices and to sell the produce of their land through their own organizations, when the workers have the opportunity to form unions and bargain through them collectively, and when the children of all the these opportunities are open to everyone, then the world moves straight ahead. But through the leaders of the Nazi Revolution, Satan now is trying to lead the common man of the world back into slavery and darkness. For the stark truth is that the violence preached by the Nazis is the devil's own religion of darkness. So also is the doctrine that one race or one class is by heredity superior, and that all other races or classes are supposed to be slaves. The march of freedom of the past 150 years has been a long, drawn-out people's revolution. In this great revolution of the people, there were the American Revolution of 1775, the French Revolution of 1792, the Latin American revolutions of the Bolivarian era, the German Revolution of 1848, the Russian Revolution of 1918. Each spoke for the common man in terms of blood on the battlefield. Some went to excess, but the significant thing is that the people groped their way to the light. The people are on the march toward even fuller freedom than the most fortunate peoples of the earth have hitherto enjoyed. No Nazi counter-revolution will stop it. The common man will smoke the Hitler stooges out into the open in the United States, in Latin America, and in India. He will destroy their influence. No Lavals, no Mussolinis will be tolerated in a free world. The people, in their millennial and revolutionary march toward manifesting here on earth the dignity that is in every human soul, hold as their credo the 4 freedoms enunciated by President Roosevelt. We who live in the United States may think there is nothing very revolutionary about freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and freedom from the fear of secret police. But when we begin to think about the significance of freedom from want for the average man, then we know that the revolution of the past 150 years has not been completed, either here in the United States or in any other nation in the world. We know that this revolution cannot stop until freedom from want has been attained. And now, as we go forward toward realizing the 4 freedoms of this people's revolution, I would like to talk about 4 duties. It is my belief that every freedom, every right, every privilege has its price, its corresponding duty, without which it cannot be enjoyed. The 4 duties of the People's Revolution, as I see them today, are these. The duty to produce to the limit. The duty to transport as rapidly as possible to the field of battle. The duty to fight with all that is in us. The duty to build a peace, just, charitable, and enduring. The 4th duty is that which inspires the other 3. We failed in our job after World War I, but by our very errors we learned much. And after this war, we shall be in position to utilize our knowledge in building a world which is economically, politically, and I hope spiritually sound. There must be neither military nor economic imperialism. Some have spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering, the century which will come out of this war, can be and must be the century of the common man. If we really believe we are fighting for a people's peace, all the rest becomes easy. Production, yes. It'll be easy to get production without either strikes or sabotage. Production with a wholehearted cooperation between willing arms and keen brains. Enthusiasm, zip, energy, geared to the tempo of keeping at it everlastingly day after day. Hitler knows as well as those of us who sit in on the War Production Board meetings that we here in the United States are winning the battle of production. He knows that both labor and business in the United States are doing a most remarkable job. I need say little about the duty to fight. Some people declare, and Hitler believes, that the American people have grown soft in the last generation. Hitler agents continually preach that we are cowards, unable to use, like the brave German soldiers, the weapons of modern war. It is true that American youth hates war with a holy hatred. But because of that fact, and because Hitler and the German people stand as the very symbol of war, we shall fight with a tireless enthusiasm until war and the possibility of war have been removed from this planet. We shall cleanse the plague spot of Europe, which is Hitler's Germany, and with it the hellhole of Asia, Japan. The American people have always had guts, and always will have. You know the story of bomber pilot Dixon, and radio man Gene Aldrich, and ordnance man Tony Pastula. The story which Americans will be telling their children for generations to illustrate man's ability to master any fate. These men lived for 34 days on the open sea in a rubber life raft 8 feet by 4 feet, with no food but that which they took from the sea and the air, with one pocket knife and a pistol. And yet they lived it through, and came at last to the beach of an island they did not know. In spite of their suffering and weakness, they stood like men, with no weapon left to protect themselves, and no shoes on their feet, and walked in military file, because they said, if there were Japs, we didn't want to be crawling. The American fighting men, and all the fighting men of the United Nations, will need to summon all their courage during the next few months. I am convinced that the year 1942 will be a time of supreme crisis for all of us. Hitler, like the prize fighter, who realizes he is on the verge of being knocked out, is gathering all his remaining forces for one last desperate blow. The convulsive efforts of the dying madman will be so great that some of us may be deceived into thinking that the situation is bad, at a time when it is really getting better. But in the case of most of us, the events of the next few months, disturbing though they may be, will only increase our will to bring about complete victory in this war of liberation. Spiritually prepared, we cannot be surprised. Psychological terrorism will fall flat. As we nerve ourselves for the supreme effort in this hemisphere, we must not forget the sublime heroism of the oppressed in Europe and Asia. There can be no half measures. No compromise with Satan is possible. We shall not rest until all the victims under the Nazi yoke are freed. We shall fight for a complete peace as well as a complete victory. The people's revolution is on the march, and the devil and all his angels cannot prevail against it. They cannot prevail, for on the side of the people is the Lord. He giveth power to the faint. To them that have no might he increaseth strength. They that wait upon the Lord shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Strong in the strength of the Lord, we who fight in the people's cause will never stop until that cause is won.
So that was a World War II speech from the Vice President of the United States. And in that speech, he called for the elimination of want in the world, freedom from want. In that speech, he said that workers should have the right to form unions, that farmers should be able to acquire land, that education should be available to all. And he hailed the American Revolution, the German Revolution, the French Revolution, the South American anti-colonial revolutions, and the Russian Revolution. He talked about a need to end both economic and militaristic imperialism and build a century for the common man. And that was the Vice President of the United States. And then this was the final State of the Union address from the President of the United States. This was the last State of the Union speech by Roosevelt. 2 years later, 1944, right before he died, his final State of the Union speech.
In our day, certain economic proofs have become accepted as self-evident. A second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station or race or creed. Among these are the right to a useful and remunerative job, the right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation, the right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living, the right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom, freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad, the right of every family to a decent home, the right to adequate medical care, and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health, the right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment, the right to a good education. All of these rights spell security. And after this war is won, we must be prepared to move forward in the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness and well-being. For unless there is security here at home, there cannot be lasting peace in the world.
Now, you watch those two speeches, and it was during the Second World War when they turned Superman from being a comic book into a radio program, that Superman adopted the slogan, "Truth, Justice, and the American Way." And that's what Superman fought for. He fought against the Ku Klux Klan on the radio show. He fought against the Nazis. He fought against Lex Luthor, the evil, wealthy technocrat fascist. And he fought for truth, justice, and the American way. And he was the man of steel. And if you can understand that Superman was a communist, but I mean, he wasn't that far. He would have fit in very, very well in the Communist Party of the time. You can understand a lot. And I'm going to help you understand a lot tonight. Sorry. Hold on. Just trying to put some slides in for you. I want to show you a picture. This is a picture from the Communist Party of the United States National Convention in 1939 in Madison Square Garden. This was the Communist Party of the United States. They gathered for their national convention in Madison Square Garden in 1939, the year before World War II broke out. I'm waiting for it to upload the image here. Okay, it says processing. Here we go. That was the 1939 convention of the Communist Party of the United States. As you can see, they've got Abraham Lincoln, the leader of the Second American Revolution to defeat slavery. And above him, it says democracy, security. And then the banner above the crowd says, "Hail the friendship of the peoples of the USA and the USSR." And then below Lincoln is the largest face you see there at the front. They've got Lenin and Stalin. Security and democracy. Hail the friendship of the peoples of the USA and the USSR. Now look at that. If you can look at that, you can understand how Superman could be a communist in 1939. That was the year that Superman was published, 38. This is the next year, 1 year later. Superman would have fit right in. Fit right in. He's up there talking about truth, justice, and the American way. He's opposing racial and ethnic bigotry. He's sticking up for labor unions. He's honoring Stalin as the man of steel. You can see Superman fitting in very, very well. Very, very well with the Communist Party. In fact, this is a clip from the Communist Party convention just a few years before. This is 1936. This is the Communist Party's national convention, also in Madison Square Gardens.
Events and issues are beginning to stand out so that they can be seen by the masses. You don't have to give long-winded explanations anymore. The people see, the people understand. What they need is a voice to express it for them and an organization to rally them. And the people are going to march forward. With the people will belong the victory.
Yeah, that was the Communist Party of the late 1930s. And Superman would have fit in very, very well in the Communist Party of the 1930s. And the Communist Party was part of the Roosevelt coalition that supported labor unions, that created unemployment insurance, and they were the anti-Jim Crow faction of the Roosevelt coalition. The leader of the communist wing of the U.S. Congress was a member of the House of Representatives from the American Labor Party, Vito Marcantonio. He was an Italian-American. He was originally a Republican, but he quit the Republican Party and he started his own party called the American Labor Party, and he was elected in Harlem in New York City. I'll show you his picture. Vito Marcantonio. And Vito Marcantonio was elected to the U.S. Congress. And even though he was very, very far away from the Jim Crow South, Vito Marcantonio, when he was in the U.S. Congress, see how long it processes this picture. Vito Marcantonio, who used to read from the Daily Worker, the Communist Party newspaper, into the U.S. Congressional Record, who represented Harlem in the U.S. Congress. Every chance he got, he would propose an anti-lynching bill, a law that would impose the death penalty for anyone who engaged in the practice of lynching black men. And that was not popular with the Democrat Party because it was still the party of the Jim Crow South. But that did not stop Vito Marcantonio because there were overwhelmingly black people in Harlem in his district, and he was a communist who stood against racism. Every time he could, Vito Marcantonio would get up and propose the anti-lynching bill and be voted down. Every time. And the Communist Party was part of the Roosevelt coalition. And they wanted friendship with the Soviet Union. They wanted friendship with China. They wanted to oppose Wall Street, to oppose fascism, to oppose racism, to support labor unions. And in the final years of his life, Roosevelt proposed that economic Bill of Rights. The right to a job, universal employment, the right to decent wages, the right to health care, the right to an education. An economic Bill of Rights was proposed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And so if you can understand what the Communist Party was, before World War II, before McCarthyism, before a lot of other things that came after McCarthyism, you can understand why Superman would have fit in very, very well with the Communist Party. And my political development came in the aftermath of the great financial crisis of 2008. After the stock market crashed, as I was finishing college and prospects of getting a job were slim, I began to study. I was already interested in communism, but I began to study Marxism to understand why the economic crisis had happened. And the person who taught me the most about Marxism is this man, William Z. Foster. William Z. Foster. And back in the day, when the Communist Party was a massive organization, he was their leader. And when Earl Browder, the guy you saw in the video earlier, tried to liquidate the Communist Party, got cowardly towards the end of the Second World War, they ousted Earl Browder. And when McCarthyism hit, William Z. Foster became the leader. He led an uprising against Earl Browder. And as the Communist Party was being crushed by the FBI, as communists were being thrown in federal prison, as the FBI was following them around to prevent them from getting jobs, William Z. Foster was their leader. And he wrote this beautiful book, The Twilight of World Capitalism. And in this book, William Z. Foster talks about all that he's learned throughout his life. And he actually dedicates his book. This is the dedication. To my great-grandson, Joseph Manley Colco, who will live in a communist United States. And this book, you can get the PDF of it very easily online on archive.org. This book speaks of a kind of communism that people just don't understand. The phrase socialism with American characteristics comes from this book. He says, socialism in America will no doubt have some American characteristics. I've quoted the part about how they envisioned coming to power. And in this text, William Z. Foster proposes the creation of an anti-monopoly coalition to unite with the small business owners, to unite with the African American community, to unite with the middle class and the industrial workers, to build an anti-monopoly coalition against big business and its drive for fascism and war. He says, he talks about the possibility of violent revolution in America. And he makes clear that they would prefer a peaceful transition to socialism, but that the capitalists could indeed be very violent in preventing the peaceful transition to socialism. He talks about the election of an anti-war, anti-monopoly coalition government in America. He says, a people's government would be forced to proceed to directly curb and undermine the power of the big monopolies by adopting far-reaching policies of nationalization of banks and major industries, breaking up of big land holdings, and the beginning of a planned economy, the elimination of reactionary control of the army, schools, and industry, as well as various other industries to weaken monopoly and strengthen the working class as a leading progressive force in the nation. American socialism, beyond question, will have its own specific forms and methods. But basically, it will be the same socialism in other countries, with big monopoly capital defeated and the industries and natural resources in the hands of the people. Production for general use instead of profit, and the working class as the leader of the whole people. Only in this way will this country and the world finally be freed from the dangers of poverty, economic chaos, fascist slavery, and murderous war. And I studied the work of William Z. Foster. And I studied the Communist Party. And I looked at the financial crisis that had happened, that had destroyed the U.S. economy. And I came to understand it was a crisis brought on by overproduction. The fact that it was cheaper than ever to produce goods. They needed fewer and fewer workers at the assembly line. And as a result, Americans were poorer than ever. And that our living standard in America had been going down since the 1980s. Our wages had been going down, and the rate of household debt had been rising. And we, the American people, had been getting poorer and poorer and poorer. And as a result, we couldn't afford to buy things the way we used to. So throughout the 90s, Alan Greenspan at the Federal Reserve had legalized all kinds of lending practices that had previously been illegal. All kinds of credit card rip-off schemes, all kinds of mortgage and housing lending schemes. And he did it to keep us spending money. To keep us spending money that we didn't have. But after a while, it only went so far, and the housing bubble burst. And in 2008, the U.S. economy crashed, and American families throughout the country lost their homes and had their homes foreclosed by the big banks. People were homeless across America. People spent their Christmas living in tents. In Nevada, there was a tent city set up. In Las Vegas, a tent city. People spent their Christmas in tents. People were homeless because there were too many houses, because the American working class could not afford to keep buying houses. People were homeless because there were too many houses. And for the same reason, the U.S. government buries cheese. It purchases huge amounts of cheese and buries it in a cave in Missouri. And that's to keep the price of dairy high. And people in America are hungry right now because there's too much food. This is the capitalist system. And what is needed is for society as a whole to come together and take control of the banks, factories, and industries and have a rationally planned economy to defeat the power of the big monopolies. The big monopolies that spread their tentacles all over the world are the imperialists, and it is our duty to build a movement to defeat the imperialists. And we seek to defeat the imperialists so that we can raise living standards, so that we can have more schools and houses and education. And the people around the world that are fighting against imperialism are on our side. The people of the Soviet Union and modern Russia, the people of China, the people of Venezuela and Iran and Cuba, all these countries are fighting against the big monopolies that dominate the global economy and also dominate the United States. And the fate of the American worker and the American people is in an alliance with the people of the world against the imperialists. And that ultimately we seek to build an anti-monopoly coalition and defeat the power of the big monopolies and reorganize U.S. society in a rational way so that growth can continue and poverty is eliminated that was the message that I understood. And one person who helped me to understand that message, who I'm going to talk a lot about tonight, he's probably watching from the grave, and he may not like a lot of what I have to say tonight, and I don't really care. I'm just going to tell it like it is. Was the author of this book. I read this book cover to cover, and I loved it. It's a great book. Low-Wage Capitalism. What the new globalized high-tech imperialism means for the class struggle in the U.S. Fred Goldstein. And I remember Fred Goldstein toured the country with this new book. He came to Cleveland. We arranged a great meeting for him in Cleveland, with speeches, etc. And I wrote a letter to the Cleveland Plain Dealer, where I encouraged people to read Fred Goldstein's book, Low-Wage Capitalism. And Fred Goldstein really taught me the economics of Marxism. In this book, he talks about the tendency of the falling rate of profit. He talks about the problem of overproduction, or the value crisis. And it was during one of his lectures that someone confronted him. They said, how could we ever have communism, a stateless, classless world? And he explained that communism would only be possible on the basis of vast abundance, and that the basis of inequality is scarcity. But communism seeks to, socialism, the first stage, public ownership and rational control of the means of production, seeks to unleash the productive forces to the point that wealth can go up and we can have a world with so much that people won't need to hoard any longer. That communism, the road to communism, is eliminating scarcity, and that socialism is about unleashing the productive forces. Well, after college, I moved to New York City. I couldn't find a job in Cleveland. I worked a lot of jobs in Cleveland that didn't go so well, and I moved to New York City. And I remember when I first moved to New York City, I worked in an insurance firm. And at the insurance firm, what I would do is I would read William Z. Foster all day. I would read, I would make my calls. I had my checklist of things I had to do. And then I had William Z. Foster PDFs on my screen, and I studied these pamphlets. And then the Occupy Wall Street protests happened. And I went to the Occupy Wall Street protests after work and on the weekends, and I sold communist newspapers. And I talked to people about communism, and I promoted Fred's writing. And I sold Fred's books to people. And I told people to come and listen to Fred's lectures. That's what I did. And before I moved to New York City, I really liked Fred because he was ideological. A lot of the leaders of the political party I was in, the Workers' World Party, were not very ideological. They just wanted to protest. They liked liberal protest. But Fred was a Marxist. And Fred, his writing and his lectures had taught me about Marxism and about the tendency of the falling rate of profit and why the financial crisis had happened. And I really looked up to Fred. But when I came to New York City, all of a sudden, Fred, who I always looked up to, and Fred, who had always been very friendly to me when I came to Cleveland, he didn't like me anymore. And I could never understand why he didn't like me. The other thing I didn't understand is that Fred lived about a block away from the Workers' World Party office. And after I was done at the insurance company, I became a full-time staffer, and I went to that office every day. It was usually empty. I would get stacks of newspapers and go out and sell them on the street, set up literature tables. And Fred wouldn't come into the office for months. Weeks would go by, and I would be in the office, and there was an older woman who was always in the office also, a woman in her 70s. But Fred, even though he lived 3 blocks away, he barely ever came into that office. Unless he was coming in to give a speech or something like that, he barely ever went into that office. But Fred did not like me. He did not like me. And I did something that I later found out made Fred very angry. Which is, what year was it, right? There was a movie that came out called Superman, Man of Steel. Yeah, 2013, the movie Superman, Man of Steel came out. And at the time, there was a website, or so we had what we called the youth fraction of the party. right? So it was not a faction and it was not a caucus, but the idea was that, in communist parties, they would have fractions based on people who did work in a particular area. You'd have the steel fraction for people working in the steel industry. You would have the labor fraction for people working in labor unions, right? You would, and so we had the youth fraction. And at the time, we had the youth fraction website. And so I wrote an article basically saying what I said to you all at the beginning about how Superman would have fit in very well in the Communist Party of the 1930s and 40s. And then I criticized the movie Superman, Man of Steel because I felt that it downplayed that. I felt that Superman, Man of Steel was almost like Ayn Randian. It was almost downplaying the populist aspects of Superman. And I later found out that that article made Fred angrier than anything. And that he later called up people, and based on the fact, part of the reason that they took down the Youth Fraction website was because I had written this article. He was just so angry that I had written this article about how Superman would have fit in the popular front of the Communist Party. He was just so livid. The article just got under his skin and made him so angry. And that he ultimately got the Youth Fraction website taken down. But guess he was a Batman guy. That's good. That's good. That's funny. But then later, I became aware of somebody else. And I'll put his picture in here, right? I became aware of somebody else. So I'll put his picture here. This was a leader of the Weather Underground. The Weather Underground was a left adventurist terrorist organization in the United States during the late 60s and up into the 1970s. And they engaged in left adventurist violence and terrorism. They were called the Weather Underground organization. And one of the leaders of the Weather Underground organization was a guy named Jeff Jones. And Jeff Jones was his name. Yeah, Jeff Jones. Here we go. I'll put up the image of Jeff Jones. Here's Bernadine Dorn and Jeff Jones. Hold on. Yeah, here we go. This is Bernadine Dorn and Jeff Jones. And Jeff Jones, that's Bernadine Dorn, who's married to Bill Ayers. And that's Jeff Jones, who was a leader of the Weather Underground. And Jeff Jones apparently said in a speech that he gave to the Weather Underground at their National War Council in Flint, Michigan in 1969, he said, "We want to appeal to the part of every kid that sympathizes with Lex Luthor and hates Superman." And when that was first quoted to me, I thought, that's crazy, because Superman was an anti-racist. Superman was an advocate of labor unions. Superman was named after Stalin. So why did Jeff Jones, the leader of the Weather Underground organization, give a speech and say, we're trying to appeal to the part of every kid that loves Lex Luthor and hates Superman? And this was the same convention that the Weathermen held, where the other woman in the picture, Bernadine Dorn, where Bernadine Dorn gave a speech honoring Charles Manson, the murderer, and saying that he killed those pigs with the forks they were eating with. Right on. And they all began saluting each other with a fork in honor of the fork that Manson's followers had killed Sharon Tate with. So Jeff Jones is saying he wants to appeal to the part of every kid that hates Superman and loves Lex Luthor. And Bernadine Dorn is saying that she wants to appeal to people who love Charles Manson. And she's honoring Charles Manson. And I later found out that when the Weathermen did their Days of Rage in 1969, their Days of Rage, Fred Goldstein was there. Fred Goldstein participated in the Days of Rage with the Weathermen, symbolically, as a representative of the Workers' World Party, because they thought that the Weathermen were leading were pushing the struggle forward. Fred Goldstein was running through the streets of Chicago with Bernadine Dorn and Bill Ayers with a football helmet on. And years later, I've started to understand this. Now, I read a very, very good book written by a member of the British Communist Party in the late 1930s named Reuben Osborne. And we are going to republish this book. It is in the public domain. And it's called Freud and Marx, A Dialectical Study. And then I just got my hands on the second book available by Reuben Osborne, which is even better. And it's called The Psychology of Reaction by Reuben Osborne. And this guy was a Freudian psychoanalyst who was a member of the British Communist Party during the 1930s. And he wrote 2 books explaining how his psychoanalytic knowledge and his understanding that he developed as a Freudian psychoanalyst could help the communist movement. And I must say, I appreciate Reuben Osborne's books. The first one that we're about to republish, Freud and Marx, A Dialectical Study, because it is the most clear explanation of the Freudian understanding of psychology that I've ever heard. It explains what the concept of the subconscious is. It explains the interpretation of dreams. It explains transference. It explains projection, the Oedipus complex, you name it. It's all in there, the stages of development. And at the very end of the book, Reuben Osborne says, we've made a big mistake because people have loyalty to their country. People have loyalty to their national heroes. And we communists have handed those things over to the fascists. And that if we want to build a successful movement, we need our movement to identify with the good things in the history of every country. And this book, the follow-up book, The Psychology of Reaction, makes the case even stronger. And it says basically fascism is an evil movement that preaches bigotry and destruction and economic degrowth, but it appeals to some of the most healthy emotions that people have. Whereas communism is a very rational movement that seeks to organize the means of production, but it appeals to some of the most negative and deviant feelings that people have. We all have different impulses and drives within us. We all love our country. You say you don't love your country, bullshit. You don't love it on a conscious level. You might be mad at the government. You might be repulsed by many of the bad things in U.S. history, but I can guarantee you, if you're an American and I flew you to the other side of the planet, you would crave a McDonald's French fry at some point. You would. If I flew you to a part of the world where you never had the opportunity to listen to some R&B, you would want to listen to R&B. That you have an attachment to the place in which you were born, to the country in which you live. You do, right? That's just natural. And your attachment to your country is very similar to the attachment you have to your parents. You love your parents, right? As bad as they may have been to you, as much pain as there is, the reason that pain might be intense is because you really love your parents, right? And the identification of one's country with one's parents is very blatant. That's why they call Germany the fatherland. That's why they call it Mother Russia. You identify with your country in the same way you identify with your parents. You might be estranged from your parents, but your parents are part of you. They're part of your identity. Part of how you see yourself relates to your parents. And that's why even if you're estranged from your parents, even if your relationship, when your parent dies, the parent who raised you dies, it is a devastating thing because they are part of you. Your soul, your identity is tied up with your parents, just like your soul and your identity is tied up with the country that you live in. Loving the country that you live in, not being a chauvinist and thinking that your country is better than other countries, not going around wanting to put down other people's countries, but just identifying with your country is just as normal and healthy as identifying with your parents. If you were raised by two adults, and they were the parental figures in your life, you are a product of them, and you are going to identify with them as you go through life. And if you grew up in Australia, like our great friend David Fox, you will identify with Australia. Australia is a part of you. Even if you're angry at the government of Australia, even if you're disgusted by the history, Australia is part of you. And that's what this was about. This was an understanding that Americans were brought up to look up to Abraham Lincoln as a great hero who fought against slavery, who held the country together. And that rather than trying to tell them, oh, Abraham Lincoln was awful, the communists should say, we are continuing what Lincoln was trying to do. Lincoln was opposed to slavery. We're opposed to wage slavery and exploitation. Lincoln believed in labor unions. We're fighting for the labor unions of workers. In fact, there's some communists that have even raised the slogan, finish the Civil War, because black people are still oppressed, because the big Wall Street banks that benefited from slavery and were tied in with the British Empire still have power. And so I think there's some communist groups that say we need to finish the Civil War. I think I heard them chanting, finish the Civil War with socialist revolution. Finish the Civil War with socialist revolution. This is common sense. If you're building a movement in America, you should appeal to the good things about American history, like the struggle to defeat slavery, like the struggle to overturn Jim Crow segregation, like the struggle for women's right to vote, like the opposition to wars, like the labor movement. You should appeal to the good things of in American history and say, we are that. And if you feel good about Lincoln, and if you love your homeland, you love your neighborhood, your community, you love your family, you should love what we're all about. This was common sense. And in the late 1930s, the communists of the world in the late 1930s came to an awakening. We have got to stop appealing to the worst in people. Why? Because, as I mentioned, you have a natural love, whether you admit it or not. You do have affection for the country in which you live, just like you have affection for your parents. But you also want to kill your parents, right? Especially when you're a teenager, you want to kill your parents, right? You get over it as you get older. But even now, there's part of you that probably resents your parents' authority, resents the way they treated you even when you were younger. But especially when you're a teenager, you want to kill your parents. Part of us wants to kill our parents, and part of us loves our parents, right? But let me ask you, which is healthier, your desire and love for your parents or your desire to kill your parents? Think about it. Which emotion, which feeling is healthier? Which emotion are people going to be proud of and embrace? Which emotion are people going to suppress? Obviously, loving your parents and the love you feel for your parents and the love you feel for your homeland is a much healthier feeling than the desire to kill your parents Both of them are natural. Both of them are part of how our human being, human mind, our human existence exists. We have both. But in this book by Reuben Osborne, which is very good, The Psychology of Reaction, we're going to publish our own edition of it. He points out that the communist movement appeals to people's desire to kill their parents, and the fascist movement appeals to people's desire to love their homeland. And that is a recipe for failure on the part of communists. And that if communists ever want to be successful, they need to look like this. And in the late 1930s, during the Popular Front years, when fascism was on the rise, communists got their shit together and they started sounding like this. And they started talking like this. Right? The way William Z. Foster talks in here, the way this convention looks, the way Roosevelt talked, the way Henry Wallace spoke, that became the way communists spoke. Communism comes out of the French Revolution. The movement that gave birth to communism is called the left. And during the French Revolution, they overthrew the king, and the people that were still loyal to the king, they formed a national assembly. They sat on the right, and the people that were more in love with the French Revolution sat on the left. And the French Revolution had been an explosion of rage and anger and an explosion of sexual release, because feudalism is a very repressive society where, peasants aren't even allowed to look their landowners in the face. They have to look down. Feudalism is a society where, peasants have no rights whatsoever. They're not allowed to question anything the Catholic Church says. They can be burned at the stake. And it's also a very sexually restrictive society where people are, told they can only have sex under certain circumstances. If you have sex outside of marriage, you can be hanged, you can be flogged. Feudalism is a society where people are constantly holding in their sexual desires and constantly holding in their anger and enduring humiliation and degradation at the hands of their natural superiors. And so when the capitalist class came along to overthrow feudalism, the way they did it is they went to people and they said, let it out. Unleash your rage. You're mad at the landlord who's oppressing you. Let it out. We'll chop his head off. We'll publicly behead him in a guillotine. And sexual release was a very big part, very, very, very big part of the French Revolution as well. The Marquis de Sade was the main propagandist of the French Revolution, the pornographic writer, the rapist, who had sexually assaulted women, cut up women, was in a mental hospital. He was one of the main people stirring up the French Revolution. And he argued that if they really wanted to keep the revolution going, they needed to have theaters where naked women could be on display so that people could look at their bodies and become sexually aroused and go and become more revolutionary. The French Revolution was an unleashing of rage and an unleashing of sexual impulses. It was a rebellion against the Catholic Church. It was a rebellion against the nobility. It was a rebellion against sexual restraint. It was the unleashing of impulses. Communism very much came out of that movement. It was people that were not satisfied with the results of the French Revolution who said, look, we don't have a just society. Yes, we have freedom. We have freedom of speech. We have freedom of assembly. But there's still rich and poor. People are still being oppressed. And they were looking for answers. And Marx was a left Hegelian, follower of the philosopher Hegel, who believed in historical progress. And he studied in Paris with people who'd been part of the French Revolution. In 1848, there were uprisings all across Europe called the Spring of Nations. And the German Revolution of 1848 was the biggest uprising in the Spring of Nations. And the German Revolution of 1848, the Communist League or the Communist Party was a faction. And the Communist Manifesto was composed as part of that uprising. Communists, revolutionaries, the left, they waved the red flag. Why? The red is the color of passion. When you're angry, your face gets red. When you're sexually aroused, red, right? When they want to make a bull really mad at a bullfight, what flag do they wave in its face? Red. Red is the color of passion and rage and anger and sexual release. And communism as a movement was very much a movement that attached itself to the left, which was the wing of capitalist politics that came out of the French Revolution, that was about tearing down traditional institutions, tearing down patriarchy, tearing down traditional social hierarchies, questioning social norms, and unleashing libido. And what Reuben Osborne figured out, and what the global communist movement, and really was Georgy Dimitrov, the leader of the United Front Against Fascism, figured out, was that that was a losing formula. And that fascists were gaining ground. Fascism is an evil ideology. It's an ideology that brings out the worst in people. It's an ideology that glorifies destruction and vengeance. It's an ideology that incites people against each other and creates a slave labor fascism is evil. But fascists were saying, appealing not to people's desire to rebel, not to people's desire to burn things down or tear them down, but rather people's desire to love their country and love their community. People's desire to have everyone get along. Communists were seen as the people that were inciting chaos and revolt and instability, whereas fascists were saying, we want a nice, healthy society where everyone gets along. Fascists were appealing to people's more healthy sentiments in order to do the evil things that they did. Whereas communism was still appealing to this deviant desire to unleash your rage, kill your parents, tear everything down. And that's why fascists were winning. And that's why Reuben Osborne wrote this book, The Psychology of Reaction, explaining this and urging the communists of Britain to change their orientation. And that's why in the late 1930s, the communists got their shit together. And the Communist Party USA started looking like this. And sounding like this. And saying communism is 20th century Americanism. The communists started very much to appeal to different sentiments, to present themselves as the inheritors of the great democratic traditions of their countries, to appeal to people's love. You know, you saw that Henry Wallace speech, how many quotes from the Bible there were. And this book quotes R. Palm Dutt. R. Palm Dutt is the brilliant writer. This book is considered a companion volume. Reuben Osborne's Psychology of Reaction is considered a companion volume to R. Palm Dutt's book, Fascism and Social Revolution. R. Palm Dutt's book focuses on the economics of fascism. Fascism as a mechanism for saving capitalism from a long-term crisis by utilizing forced degrowth, trying to grind back the wheels of the history. Reuben Osborne's book gets into the psychology behind fascism and how fascists are appealing to some of the most basic natural desires on the part of people. And communists have made the mistake of handing those desires over to the fascists. And this book is really a polemic. It is urging the communists of the world to become patriots, to become defenders of community, defenders of family, and to stop with that deviant mindset. Basically, Reuben Osborne and Georgy Dimitrov were telling people that we need Superman communism. And if you read William Z. Foster, right, you read Gus Hall, you read communist stuff from this period, it was Superman communism. It was appealing to the best in people. We want truth, justice, and the American way. We oppose racism. We want friendship with the Soviet Union. We're for the rights of the common man against these sick monopolists, these deviants, like these billionaire technocrat fascists like Lex Luthor Bezos. Superman communism made a lot of sense. And that was a winning formula. And when communism had a mass appeal, and when communism in America was part of the Roosevelt coalition, and when Stalin, a brilliant mass organizer, was the leader of the global communist movement in the Soviet Union, It sounded like Superman communism. But what happened? What happened? Well, a couple different things happened. Number one, McCarthyism happened. And the USA had a booming economy during the 1950s, and the FBI crushed the Communist Party. And the Communist Party of the United States got weakened. What else happened? Well, the Congress for Cultural Freedom was created. And the Congress for Cultural Freedom was a CIA-funded project to change art and culture and to change socialist politics. They set up a magazine called Partisan Review. They set up a magazine called Der Monat in Germany that funded the Frankfurt School. They set up a magazine called Encounter in Britain. They funded the work of Jackson Pollock. And they countered social realist art with abstract art. And instead of having works of art that glorified workers as the builders of society, they had people just putting splotches of paint on a canvas. Because that's rebellion, that's freedom, right? We don't need any of those authoritarian lines. And we certainly don't need art that gives a message or tells people to, believe something or no. We just need art that makes people question reality. Art that celebrates vulgarity, feces, pornography. Right? We don't want any of that authoritarian art that talks about right and wrong, that celebrates big, strong workers. That's fascist, don't you know? Strength is fascist. And the new left was the embracing of all the deviant psychology that the communist movement had worked to suppress. The new left was an attempt to say, to be a leftist, well, first of all, you have to hate the Soviet Union. You have to hate China and Mao. You have to hate all the communist countries. But on top of that, don't just hate the communist countries. You have to hate this. This is fascist. This is cult of personality. This is national chauvinism. You can't have this. You can't have it, right? Instead, you can't have this. No. Let's pull up a Jackson Pollock painting, right? No, being a leftist isn't about continuing the tradition of Abraham Lincoln and the struggle to overturn slavery. No. Being a leftist isn't about all the good things in American history, taking power and asserting themselves. No. Being a leftist, no, we can't have this kind of art. No. We can't have that kind of art. That's authoritarian. That's fascist. That's authoritarian. We can't have that, even though Lincoln was fighting against slavery, even though he led a coalition that had within it great abolitionists like Frederick Douglass and others. No. Even though Abraham Lincoln was the leader of a coalition that eventually ended legal slavery in the United States. No. We can't have that. We can't have that. Right? We can't have that. No. Instead, what we need to have, what's the true expression of freedom, is this. This is freedom. Look at that. That's what it means to be free. No message, no shapes, just a bunch of splotches everywhere. That's freedom right there. Why? Because you're letting it all out. You just want to throw paint on a canvas and have a tantrum. You just throw your paint on a canvas. right? Just like a baby with diarrhea just shits everywhere. No one's holding it in, right? You can just let all your rage out and just throw the pain everywhere. You can just let all your sexual impulses everywhere. That's what it means to be a leftist. That's what it means to be a socialist. And of course, we hate all the communist countries. In fact, they're just like the Nazis. And that's what fascism is. It's strength. People being physically fit are fascist. Gymnastics is fascist. Exercise is fascist. Saying that real truth and real right and wrong exist, that's fascist. So as the Communist Party was defeated, I agree. We got a movement that rejected the economics of the Communist Party, that didn't call for public ownership of the means of production, didn't call for the working class to rise up and seize the means of production, but instead was just an expression of libidinal release, was just the libidinal release, the impulse release, and was just appealing to the very deviant things, the deviant appeal that the communists worked so hard to not have. But that brings me back to good old Fred Goldstein. And wherever he is, Fred, I have forgiven you for this. I've forgiven you, and I talk about you more than anybody. Fred, you're watching in another dimension, in the afterlife. Fred, I'm keeping you alive. I'm the only person who talks about you nowadays. You know that? I wave your books around on my streams. More of your books have probably sold because I talk about them on this stream than ever before. Fred, I am your best friend in the living world right now, right? And you taught me a lot that I know, but I'm going to be real, Fred, about some of your faults. When I first moved to New York City, Fred, I told you he didn't like me. So one day, Fred invited me over to his apartment. And Fred asked me what Marxist books I was reading. And I told him that I was reading Trotsky's Writings in Exile, that I had volumes. I still have them. I was reading Trotsky's Writings in Exile. And I asked me why I was reading it. And I said, because our party, the Workers' World Party, we are a Trotskyist party. We come out of the history of Trotskyism. And I said, I increasingly find Trotskyism to be unappealing. I said, I like William Z. Foster. And Fred did a double take. William Z. Foster. How do you even know that name? Nobody talks about William Z. Foster. Someone your age knows about William Z. Foster. Fred was shocked I knew who William Z. Foster was. But anyway, the conversation continued. Fred asked me what I disagreed with Trotsky about. And I said, Stakhanovism. Right? In the Soviet Union, during the 1930s, they had this program called Stakhanovism, where the hardest working person got rewarded. And I said, Stakhanovism, at the time in the Soviet Union, they were performing economic miracles. They were industrializing the whole country very rapidly. They were raising all these people out of poverty. They were industrializing the country, and they were building steel mills and power plants. And they did it with this program called Stakhanovism, where if you worked really hard, you got rewarded. And Trotsky attacked the program. And I said, why is he doing that? Why would Trotsky attack the Stakhanovism program? And I said, the Soviet Union was performing miracles. The socialist country was doing great things. Why would Trotsky attack him? And Fred got very angry with me. And he said to me, who told you could just go read this Trotsky stuff on your own? And I said, do you want me to ask permission before I read Marxist books? You want me to just ask permission? He's like, and he points at me and says, you are really developed, young man. You are really developed. I'm very developed. Why is that a bad thing? if I'm a young man who's in a Marxist party, shouldn't I be ideologically developed? And it was a weird night. I'll just tell you that much, because this was supposed to be the leader of the political group I was in. And I realized that to some degree or other, he didn't have confidence in his own political views. Fred believed things because Sam Marcy said them to him. The founder of the Workers' World Party had told him it. He didn't really think things through very much. And hearing me just off the top of my head critique Trotsky scared him a lot because he didn't have the answers, because his group was dying. It was a tiny political sect. And even though he did understand why the financial crisis had happened, and even though he did have a basic understanding of Marxism, tactically, what had gone on in the Soviet Union, why the Soviet Union had fallen, what was going on with socialism in the world today, he was lost. He didn't know what was going on. He was at a loss. But then, and this is what I wanted to get to, because this is very powerful. Later in the conversation, I'm going to try to not start crying, because this is so bizarre and weird, but it's also so beautiful in a way. Fred told me about how he met this man. Fred is the only person who has a memory of William Z. Foster that I've ever met. I've met many people. There were older communists that I met who were probably in the same place that Foster was at one point. But Fred Goldstein had met William Z. Foster. And that night, when I was sitting in his apartment, hearing him scream at me, "Who told you you could just read Trotsky on your own?" He told me about how he met William Z. Foster. He told me that when he was a little child in the Bronx, he grew up in the Bronx, and that his father was driving him through the Bronx one day. And they were driving through the Bronx, and all of a sudden, his father jerked the car to a stop. He jerked the car to a stop. They stopped along the side of the road, and his father got out. Because this man was walking by. And he said he remembered his father. There was this old man just walking down the street all by himself. And his father jerked the car to a stop and got out and practically bowed before this man. He said to him, can I drive you any place? Can I get you some coffee? Can I get you some food? His father was like in awe of this man. And that young Fred didn't understand what was going on. And then his father got back into the car and told Fred, that is the greatest man who's ever lived. And that this was the 1950s that Fred was remembering. And that Fred's father was a loyal member of the Communist Party. And William Z. Foster was living in the Bronx during these years because he had a heart condition. And he was deemed unfit to stand trial by the U.S. federal court system. But the entire national board of the Communist Party were in federal prison during those years. And William Z. Foster, because he had a heart condition, He was deemed unfit to stand trial. He wasn't in federal prison. He was living in the Bronx. And that William Z. Foster, in his late years in the 1950s, before he died in 1961, he lived in the Bronx. And the FBI followed him everywhere he went and monitored his actions. And that to Fred's father, William Z. Foster stood for all the persecution they were enduring in those years. William Z. Foster was the man who said that it was all worthwhile. William Z. Foster represented the Soviet Union, 1/5 of the planet that had broken free from imperialism. William Z. Foster had represented the labor movement and the labor unions. Fred's father had been a labor unionist. And Fred's father had jerked the car to a stop. And it was like a Catholic meeting the Pope for his father to meet William Z. Foster. And I sat there in Fred's apartment and I heard him tell me about his memory of William Z. Foster. About how William Z. Foster, he said he was a kind of a tired old man, but that his father, and what I heard from Fred was not, Fred wasn't really thinking very much about William Z. Foster. Fred was thinking about his father and how much contempt he had for his father. The Communist Party was his father's church. And he was angry at his dad. And he thought his dad was foolish for bowing before this old man in the Bronx. And he thought, oh, yeah, my dad, William Z. Foster, he was just this, oh, yeah, I mean, my dad, he jerked the car to a stop. And that's why Fred was so angry about my article about Superman. Because there is something so much bigger than capitalism versus communism going on in the world right now. There is something so much bigger than ideologies or economic systems battling themselves out. There is a spiritual war taking place right now. And what Reuben Osborne was writing about in his Psychology of Reaction, which I do recommend you read, and go and read Freud and Marx, and go and read Reuben Osborne in Psychology of Reaction. And the reason that the Communist Party looked this way is because in the lead up to World War II, the communists were getting themselves on the right side. There was a war going on in the world. And there was one faction that wanted to destroy. You heard Henry Wallace speaking on there about how Nazism is the devil's own religion of darkness, a plan to march humanity backward into slavery. Henry Wallace was exactly right. And what did Henry Wallace say that the American people were fighting for? A century for the common man. Giving people access to healthcare and education and jobs and economic opportunity. A century for the common man. Freedom from want. The battle in the Second World War was between the Soviet Union, that had lifted millions of people up from poverty and was building itself up with 5-year economic plans, that was aligned with the United States, where the response to the Great Depression had been Roosevelt becoming a Bonapartist and aligning with the labor unions and building Key West Highway and building post offices and funding scientific research and building beautiful murals in the post offices of the country and building LaGuardia Airport and constructing. And there was a spiritual war going on in the world between the forces that said the way to respond to the Great Depression is to grind back the wheels of history, start breeding people like animals, reduce the population, grind people into poverty, create artificial scarcity, reassert hierarchies and say that some are just naturally superior to others, create a slave labor underclass and prepare for universal war. That's what Hitler was fighting for. And Stalin, the man of steel, and Roosevelt and Henry Wallace talking about freedom from want, they were fighting for something different. And there was a spiritual war taking place in the world. And the communists were on the right side of that spiritual war. And they realized it. During the Second World War, Stalin brought back the Russian Orthodox Church. No leader in the history of Russia has built more Russian Orthodox churches than Stalin. And during that war, humanity was faced with the question of growth or degrowth. Growth or degrowth, progress or reaction. And the communists and Roosevelt were on the right side. And Hitler and Trotsky were on the wrong side. And this was a spiritual question. Even though it was about economics, even though it was about a crisis of overproduction that had brought on the Great Depression, the fascists wanted to resolve the Great Depression by creating a slave labor underclass. And the communists wanted to resolve the Great Depression by having society take control of the banks, factories, and industries and rationally organize society so that growth would no longer be restrained. And in order for the communists to get their shit together and defeat fascism, they had to break with that libidinal appeal. They couldn't be leftists anymore. They had to look like this. They had to start appealing to the best in people. They sounded politically and spiritually, aesthetically different. They were celebrating order, not chaos. And that is what scared the ruling class more than anything. Right? I actually had an opportunity to visit the Moscow subways. Let me see if I can find the video for you all. I visited the Moscow subways and I saw, I'll just show you, I'm not going to show you the whole video. And I saw some of the art from the Stalin era. And I'm going to show you that art that they have in the Moscow subways. They've been revamping the Moscow subways to look like the Stalin era. Right? They've been getting them back to the original way that they were during the Stalin years. They've been doing that because, again, that's the power and the forces that they are fighting in Kiev with their torchlit marches, the tear down World War II memorials. Those forces are the same forces that they were fighting in World War II. And they brag about it. They honor Stepan Bandera a literal Nazi collaborator. They're very open about it. And there's something deeper happening in the world today. I understand it on an economic level. I understand it on a political level. But we can talk about it on a spiritual level as well. And we should talk about it on a spiritual level as well, because it is very, very deep. Let me find this video for you. Where is it? All right. Here we go. Here we go. All right. Let's see if I can. Okay, hold on. Yeah, that video is almost downloaded for you, but I'll show you the art in the Moscow subways. All right. Well, I'm an American, and I love my country. I'm a Christian, and I try to live according to the teachings of Jesus Christ. But if you look at the way our government is operating right now, it's not in the interest of the American people. They're working to protect an international... All right, let's skip ahead, right? I could ramble about politics all day long, but let's... All righty. Oh yeah, here we go. This is the subway. This beautiful mural, this painting that they've got behind me here in the subway system. This is just the normal subway system that people take on their way to work, on their way home from school, to, you know, to get through the city. This is the normal subway system. You can hear trains going by. They have this beautiful banner, but there's actually some very important significance to this banner. I want to point this out. This is a banner commemorating the victory over fascism, and it actually includes traditional Ukrainian dancers celebrating the victory over fascism, right? You see the banners with Lenin, you see the soldiers, and this is the victory in the Second World War, what they call the Great Patriotic War. And it has traditional Ukrainian dancers because Ukrainians are considered to be part of Russia. And they have no opposition to Ukrainian culture. They have no opposition to the Ukrainian language or Ukrainian traditions. And here in Moscow, you see traditional Ukrainian dancers celebrating, and this mural celebrating the victory, the defeat of the Nazis during the Second World War with banners of Lenin and the Red Army. But this is a monument in Kiev, in the Ukrainian capital, and traditional Ukrainian dancers participating in the mural. So this is something I wish more Americans were aware of. Tucker Carlson and others have reflected on just how beautiful the subways really are here. And compared to our New York City subways, I mean, this is like a palace. You know, this is like a palace. It's so clean, so beautiful architecture, etc. But it's also important to understand the political significance of these banners. All around me here in the Moscow subways, you see these statues of working people, right? Of soldiers, of construction workers, all around me, right? And that's one of the beautiful things about social realism or socialist realism, is it makes ordinary people into heroes, right? This is a sailor over here, right? This is a guy with a disc in his hand. I think he's a machinist. Right, and it makes ordinary people who do the work of the world, it makes them into heroes, and it kind of beautifies and celebrates just kind of the glory of ordinary people. I'll show you another one here. This guy's got a disc. And apparently all of these statues are actually based on real individuals. But the reason this is important, right, this is a woman, feeding a chicken, right, a woman feeding a chicken. The reason this is important is because this kind of art, social realism or socialist realism,
This was not only the art that was popular in the Soviet Union, it was also popular in the United States. When President Roosevelt hired millions of unemployed workers to build hospitals and schools and post offices and libraries across America, they put social realist paintings and social realist murals and statues in these new buildings that were being built in the United States. And it was in the 1950s that the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States, the CIA, decided that they didn't like this kind of art. They decided this kind of art was fascist, this kind of art was dangerous propaganda. So the CIA began funding modern art or abstract art. And because they wanted to counter this kind of beautiful art that glorifies and celebrates ordinary people, the CIA started funding the work of Jackson Pollock, who just kind of throws paint on a canvas, splattering paint, or art that is just abstract shapes, because they're threatened by the power of social realism. And it was the left, the socialists and revolutionaries that promoted social realism, but it's because of CIA meddling and the Congress for Cultural Freedom program of American intelligence. Now the left no longer celebrates this kind of beauty. Now the left, glorifies, splattering paint on a canvas, modern art, degeneracy, these kinds of things. But that was a conscious manipulation by American intelligence. It's really wild to think that American intelligence agencies are funding art projects and funding music, but they did. They didn't like this kind of beauty. They wanted to steal it from us.
So yeah, that's an important thing to understand. And leftism has become synonymous with kill your father, kill your parents, right? Rebellion, the unleashing of rebellion, appealing to the part of every kid that hates Superman and loves Lex Luthor. And that's what the Weather Underground have become. And serious the communists learned this the hard way. And the communist world has largely learned this. They're not appealing to people's rebellion. The Cultural Revolution in China is considered to be a disaster. Socialism is about construction and growth and building around the world. But leftism in the West has been taken over by satanic impulses. They don't talk about overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profit and poverty created by abundance. None of the stuff we talk about how labor replaces technology and how we need a rationally planned economy so that growth can be eliminated so we can get to that higher stage of communism. All that stuff I learned from Fred, to be fair. I learned that from Fred, despite Fred's his weirdness. I learned all of that from Fred, and nobody talks about any of that stuff anymore. Right? In fact, all they talk about anymore, they've just got the satanic impulses. People are talking about pee and poop in subways, and they got art sketches of pee and poop, right? I mean, they got art galleries of that, and they got Jackson Pollock, and that leftism has become synonymous with kill your parents. And what was the devastating blow that really had a lot to do with the fall of the Soviet Union? That was Khrushchev's secret speech, right? That Stalin had been the leader of the Soviet Union, who had lifted millions of people from poverty. Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union, and he had led the fight against fascism. After Stalin died, Khrushchev was the new leader of the Soviet Union, and he got up and he took a dump all over Stalin. And it psychologically devastated the Soviet people to think that the leader of their country, who had led them through so much, was no good, was an evil, self-serving man, right? The secret speech of Khrushchev, from which the phrase cult of personality is derived, that secret speech devastated and destroyed the Soviet Union. But that secret speech was an expression of leftist impulses. Kill your father, right? No cult of personality. Right? And that this is why we have to move away from the word communism. I am at the point that, it's hard for me. It's very hard for me to move away from the word communism because my whole identity has been with communism, but my views haven't changed. I still believe in historical progress. I still believe we're getting from hunter-gatherer civilization to slavery to feudalism to capitalism to communism. To socialism, to communism. I still believe imperialism must be defeated and we need a rationally planned economy. We have our 4-point plan for a society where, moving toward a society where the rational planning of the economy, public control of banking, public control of natural resources, mass mobilization to rebuild the country, an economic bill of rights. I still believe in anti-imperialism. I still believe in economic growth and a planned economy. I still believe in the working class. I still believe in defeating the power of the big monopolies and the imperialists. I still stand in solidarity with socialism and with the countries around the world that have broken out of imperialism. But that is not what leftism means. That is not what leftism means. And in order to preserve that belief, I have to break with the word communism, and it doesn't make any sense. And I've made this parallel many times, but I'm starting to see the parallel more clearly, right? Great example, right? I've talked many times, many times, about how, Lenin told his followers they had to change their name. They had to become communists and not social democrats, because social democracy was something different. And I've talked about how Christianity, when it started, they had to change their name. Originally, they considered themselves to be Jews, but what they were preaching was so different than what Jews were preaching that they changed it. Well, this is where it gets interesting. What is one of the primary differences that Christians had with Jews back in those days? Judaism is very different nowadays, but what was the primary difference that Jesus and his followers had with the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin? Well, it came down to what they call legalism. Whereas the Pharisees, they had a list of rules that everyone must follow. And that's what it meant to obey God, is you had this very long, complicated list of rules, and everyone had to follow those rules, and there were all kinds of loopholes, and it was this elaborate set of rules that everyone had to follow. And Jesus many times said, I don't care about your legalism. Right? They asked Jesus, for a great example, right, is Jesus was asked by the Pharisees. They said to him, which of the 10 commandments is the greatest commandment? And they were trying to trip him up. They wanted to get him in trouble for saying that one commandment was better than the other. And he said, the 2 greatest commandments are love your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And all the others will follow. And he basically said, no, the 10 commandments are not the most important. The most important is to love your God with all your heart and soul and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus healed people on the Sabbath. And they said to Jesus, you're never supposed to do anything on the Sabbath. You can't heal people on the Sabbath. And he said, the Sabbath was made for man. Man was not made for the Sabbath. And that he was upholding right and wrong. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love God. And saying, don't get caught up in little technicalities. That was the essence of what Jesus was saying. He was saying that I am upholding the essence, and I'm throwing the details behind. And you all are defending the details, and you have forgotten the essence. And that's important to understand, because that is what I am seeing endlessly with so-called communists, right? I got to tell you, it is a crime what has been done to me, right? I am somebody who has risked my life trying to bring medical aid to Yemen. I am somebody who has led delegations to global communist youth festivals. If you are genuinely anti-imperialist, you should love what I have done. Was it good? If you're genuinely anti-imperialist, was it good for me to confront Sa Ing-wen or not? If you're genuinely anti-imperialist, was it good for me to risk my life on a ship to Yemen, or was it not? Right? If you are genuinely anti-imperialist, you should admire the work that I do. But these people are not genuinely anti-imperialist. A great example of this, right? What's the first thing I got canceled for? The first major cancel that they dumped on me. What was it? The first major cancel I got was patriotic socialism. I waved an American flag. Oh my God. And all these people are like, oh my God, you waved an American flag. That's racist. That's American chauvinist. And it's like, no. The essence of Marxism-Leninism is to defeat imperialism, to build a mass movement to defeat the imperialists. And in order to do that, we need to appeal to the bulk of the population. And we need to show them that we don't want to destroy their country and that we're working, that it would be in the interests of the American people to defeat imperialism. So waving an American flag is in line with the essence of Marxism-Leninism. I'm building a movement of the American people against imperialism. But they don't see it. They're not thinking of how can we build a mass movement against imperialism. They're thinking in terms of legalism. Oh, American flag, that's against Rule 513. That's an imperialist flag. You should never wave it. Well, that's funny because Gus Hall waved it. William Z. Foster waved it. You know, the communists, all the great communists in this country, they all waved the American flag. They said they were the inheritors of the American Revolution. Eugene Debs even opposed flag burning. Right? I mean, and the essence of being a Marxist-Leninist and opposing imperialism is not a piece of cloth. It's, are you actually building a movement? But they're concerned about the legalism of it. No, that's the American flag. And they're missing the essence. They condemn me for waving an American flag while they make excuses to oppose Russia. Right? Even they sit there and they think of how can we decide that Russia is imperialist? And they do all kinds of leaps and all of that, leaps and backflips so that Russia is imperialist so they can be out there echoing CNN and waving the Ukrainian flag. Well, guess what, people? Even if Russia was imperialist, you should still support them. That's called revolutionary defeatism, is we never march behind the imperialists when they're attacking a country, even a rival imperialist country. We always march against the imperialists, just like Marx championed the cause of the Irish people against the English. Just like during World War I, the Wobblies said, turn your guns around, the real enemy is at home. We never march behind the imperialists. So if the imperialists are telling us to hate Russia, we don't hate Russia. We do the opposite. We stand with Russia. That's what it means to be an anti-imperialist. And you want to throw a fit. You don't stand with Russia. You think of some loophole. Well, I'm going to reinterpret the definition of imperialism so that Russia can be an imperialist. And I'm going to march alongside the pro-imperialist mobs that are, tearing down Russian symbols and demonizing Russia. I am going to echo CNN and their hatred for Russia, but I don't carry a piece of cloth. So I'm the real Marxist-Leninist. That is the definition of legalism. That is exactly legalism. You are not opposing imperialism. You're fixating on a piece of cloth. And there's so many examples of this. I am upholding the essence of Marxism-Leninism. I am saying that we must stand with the people who are under attack by the imperialists. I am saying we must build a movement of working people of all races and nationalities to demand jobs and schools and education. And we have to build a serious movement to stop World War III, to stop the low-wage police state. And you're sitting there playing dress up and going, I'm on the Politburo. Did you know I'm on the Politburo? And it's like you're missing the point. You're missing the point. You're missing the point entirely. You're missing the forest for the trees, as Rachel said in the chat. But it's more than that. You're missing the essence of the point. The point is that when the big monopolies are marching us towards war, we always stand against them. The point is we build the biggest mass movement of working people to stand up to fight for their jobs and their schools and their neighborhoods and their communities against the monopolies and against their degrowth and their police state as possible. That's the point. The point is to actually win. The point is to actually win, and the point is to actually oppose imperialism, and you do neither. You don't impose the imperialists. You think of little legalistic excuses about it, and then you fart and fixate over a flag. Right? You don't build a mass movement among the workers. You build a stupid internet fandom. right? About, building fans on the internet and, and just, and fighting with other fandoms. You build this stupid fandom, this exclusive little fandom. And then you attack me because I want to build a mass movement. And doing that means I need to communicate to the masses of people that I don't hate them, right? And it's like we're at the point where these people, they are missing the point entirely. They're playing a legalistic game, and they have forgotten the essence of what it's all about. And that's what Lenin said about Marxism. Right? The social democrats, they may have all the Marx quotes, but the essence of what Marx was fighting for was the working class against the big corporations. And the social democrats, they might have all the quotes and they might be able to quote Marx chapter and verse. And you bet Karl Kautsky certainly could. But when World War I broke out, they led workers off to die. And the Bolsheviks stood against it. And maybe they changed and maybe they deviated from what Marx had said, but they preserved the essence of what Marx was saying. They preserved the essence of it. And that's the point. We are preserving the essence of what Marxism is. We are saying that we need a mass movement. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We are saying we must oppose World War III and we must oppose the low-wage police state, and we must build as broad of a movement possible to defend our schools and our jobs and our communities and our families and our neighborhoods from the low-wage police state the imperialist monopolies are seeking to impose. And these people, again, they might be, well, I read according to the book of Marx, I have a quote from chapter 3. Yes, but you're missing the essence. You are engaging in Marxist legalism. You're quote mining, you're pulling a quote here and you're pulling a quote there, but the very essence of what this is all supposed to be about and what it is really about in the countries that I have been to. I have been to Central Caracas. I have been to Managua. I have been to Tehran. I have been to Moscow and Sochi and Yalta. I know what this is about for real. Folks, I know what this is really about. And I am fighting for what it is really about. And you are dicking around and fooling around and playing dress up and acting stupid and pulling little quotes and talking about your Politburos and all of that. We're in this for real, and we want to win this. And you are being stupid. And it infuriates me to no degree. I am an apostate, right? If communists burned people at the stake, they would have burned me at the stake a long time ago. I am an apostate in the communist communities. They would burn me at the stake and hang me and draw me and quarter. I cannot walk into any communist space in the United States. If I walked into the People's Forum in New York City, they would probably punch me in the face. I cannot walk into any communist space or any place. I went to New School University when the students were occupying the cafeteria, and they said, they took me aside. Some people aren't comfortable that you're here. We heard that you're like a white nationalist and you're a friend of Richard Spencer. I'm not a white nationalist. I've never met Richard Spencer. But they have called me every dirty rundown name. I am safer with normal people than I am with communists. If someone says to me I'm a communist, I run the other way, because the first thing they tell you in any communist group, I swear, the first thing they tell you in any communist group is, there's this guy named Caleb. He's bad. No, I am dead serious. The first thing they tell you, if you join the PSL, the first thing they tell you is, okay, now there's this guy named Caleb. He's bad. You join CPUSA. I have certified. People have told me that this was in their question, right? They've said, they applied to join the CPUSA, and they say, now, are you involved with that Caleb Maupin? I'm not exaggerating. It sounds arrogant, but this is how it is. I am the apostate, the ineffective, weak, isolated, pathetic communist movement in America that is smaller and weaker and more irrelevant than ever, has declared me to be public enemy number one. And I mean, I don't care what you are. If you're in the CPUSA or the PSL or the ISO or the QWH or the ACP or the XYZ, I am Satan. I am public enemy number one. I'm a Nazi, pedo, rapist, axe murdering child eater. I am everyone just knows I'm bad. I am bad. I am just bad. Caleb is bad. Why is he bad? I don't know. Isn't he like a fascist or a neo-Nazi or a child molester? Or I'm none of those things. I'm just somebody who believes in what you all pretend to believe in. And I'm someone who's tired of your bullshit. And I'm somebody who's here to call out your phoniness. That's what I am. I am somebody who is exposing you. I am somebody who has shown that if you were sincere, you could be doing thousands and thousands of times more than what you're doing. With my limited resources and with a small organization that I have, we have moved mountains. We have moved mountains. And if we can move mountains, what the fuck are you doing with your thousands of dollars? What the fuck are you doing with your big expensive offices all across the United States? What the fuck are you doing with your hundreds of thousands of YouTube followers? What the fuck are you doing? Right? If I, on this small YouTube channel with my small organization, if I can do what I'm doing, what the fuck are you doing? Dicking around and calling yourself the Politburo. Oh, I'm the Politburo. You know, last I checked, Politburos don't exist in American political parties, you fuckwads. You know, or we had a rally for Palestine and we called out racist, sexist white males. Well, geez, wouldn't it be nice if all the racist, sexist white males in America stopped supporting Israel? You know, that would probably be a good thing. I think it would be great if all the white straight males of America opposed Israel. I think we'd be better off. No, we don't want racist white males. No, Israel's a country full of racist white males, just like America. I mean, these people are idiots. These people are fools. These people are complete fools. These people are complete and utter fools, and they have commandeered our movement. And they're so busy playing dress up, and they're so busy playing legalism, and they lose their minds over an American flag, and they lose their minds over this and that. And it's like, I mean, the only person that would consider joining them is somebody, it's not, look, I want the party that Fred's dad was in. That's the party I want to join. If that party ever shows up again, I'll join it, and they'll be happy to have me join it. But I don't want to join Fred's party. I was in Fred's party for 8 years, and it didn't end well. And I tried to be in Fred's party, and I tried not to even leave. But I don't want to join a party that wants to appeal to the part of every kid that hates Superman and loves Lex Luthor. I want to appeal to the party of Superman. And there's a reason that just drove Fred over the edge. He just couldn't stand it. Oh, my God. He's saying that the CPUSA of the 1930s and 40s, he's saying that my dad's party was good. He's saying that old man that my dad was bowing before on the streets of the Bronx was a good man. Yes, Fred, I am saying that. And I'm saying that all your negativity and all your hostility and your scarcity mindset, your belief that we're only ever going to be a fringe group, so you got to be the king of this tiny irrelevant fringe, that's got to go. Look, I will never forget a conversation that I had. All right. This was towards the end of my involvement with the group I was in. And I remember it was one of the leaders of the group. And I wrote an internal document critiquing them because they wanted to endorse Bernie Sanders. Now, looking back on it, I might think endorsing Bernie Sanders is a good thing now, but that's a whole nother thing. That's beside the point. I said to the party, we have failed because millions of Americans are turning to Bernie Sanders to teach them about socialism. They should be turning to us. And I was right? This idea that we should just have liberal rallies was absurd, right? This idea that Americans were ready to hear socialist rhetoric. And I said, they should be getting socialism from us. They shouldn't be getting it from Bernie Sanders. And I remember this old woman who was a leader of the party called me on the phone, and she said to me, She said to me, that article you wrote was ridiculous. Do you think we could ever be as big as Bernie Sanders? He's a member of the U.S. Congress. How could you ever think we could ever be as big as Bernie Sanders? And I said to her on the phone, I said, excuse me, aren't we supposed to be taking power at some point? I mean, aren't we supposed to eventually become the government? There was dead silence on the other end of the phone. Dead silence. You know, sometimes they're just too honest. Look, I got to tell you folks, the Weathermen, the Weather Underground was a satanic organization. Absolutely. In every way, they appealed to what was evil in people. These people, I'll put them on the screen once more. That's evil. The people that loved Charles Manson, the people that wanted to appeal to the part of every kid that hates Lex Luthor, hates Superman and loves Lex Luthor, that is evil. And you know what else is evil? That is evil also. Art that degrades people, art that makes people confused and disoriented, art that looks better if you're on drugs and if you're taking acid and you're like going to lose yourself. Oh, I'm lost in the painting, man. I'm on my acid, dude. I'm lost in the painting. That is evil. That is evil. This is evil, and that is evil. And I want nothing to do with evil. And it is so much deeper than capitalism versus communism. Because right now, there is a global anti-imperialist movement. And that global anti-imperialist movement, it looks like this. That's what it looks like. That's what it looks like. And if we build a real anti-imperialist movement in America, it is going to look like that. That is what it's going to look like. And I want nothing to do with a movement that looks like that. And I want nothing to do with a movement that talks the way those people talk. I want to build a movement that looks like that. That's what I want to do. Have I shown you all the most beautiful statue in the world? I'll show it to you all again. I want everyone to see this. This is the most beautiful statue in the world. The most beautiful statue in the world. Hold on. The most beautiful statue in the world. I've shown it many times on these streams, but I'm showing it again. This is the statue. This is the statue that was built to commemorate the independence of Senegal. Hold on. Hold on. Just trying to put it on the screen here. Why is StreamYard being so annoying right now? This is very, very annoying. Very, very, very annoying. But hey, all in a day's work, right? I've shown it here many, many times, and I want to show it again because it's just such a beautiful, beautiful statue. And let's see if I can. Okay, let me see. I think I can get it on here now. Hold on. Right? This is what I always come to when I think of great art in our time. Here we go. Look at that. Right? The African nation of Senegal got this beautiful statue. And they contracted North Korea, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, to build this beautiful, beautiful statue. Right? And it is celebrating strength. Look how physically fit that African father is. He's built, right? He's been working out, right? And how beautiful the mother is, the wife, and the beautiful little baby pointing toward the future. I mean, that must be fascist. That is totally fascist, right? It's glorifying strength. It's glorifying the family. Can't have that, right? A mother, a heterosexual couple with a baby, and it's promoting birth, natalism, having children, physical strength. I mean, this is Nazi artwork right here. This is Nazi artwork right here. They would never put up a statue of this at the People's Forum, right? They would never put up a statue of this at where is another left space, right? Oh my God, this is Nazi. You got physical fitness. You got a mother and a father and a baby. You got pointing toward the future, optimism. Oh, the horror. Oh, the horror. Well, this is what the African people wanted to commemorate their independence from colonialism. And this is what an actual communist government built for them in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Right? This is what it's really about, folks. Look at this picture. This is what it's really about. And this is what I believe in. I don't believe in vengeance and violence. I don't believe in tearing it down and burning it down. I'm not in this to release my sexual impulses. I'm not in this to get my anger out. I'm not in this to take revenge on my family. I'm in this for that. I want African kids to be born. I want African families to have children. I want the next generation to look at the future and point at the future with optimism and hope. I want people to be more physically fit and hopeful and prosperous. I want economic growth. I believe in the Belt and Road Initiative of China. I believe in the Eurasian Economic Union. I believe in the BRICS organization. I believe in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I believe in Chairman O'Malley and the People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. I believe in Mao Zedong and Kim Il-sung and Fidel Castro. I believe in Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. I believe in Daniel Ortega. I believe in Imam Khomeini and Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. I believe in the Palestinian people. I believe in the people of Cuba. I believe in the American working class. I believe in working families in this country. And I am for standing arm in arm with the people of the world against the Wall Street monopolists and their degrowth and their low-wage police state and their disgusting, cynical, pessimistic culture and their degrowth Malthusianism and all of their evil. I believe in humanity. I am motivated by love for humanity. I am motivated by a belief that we should do our best. You know, I just want to say this. It's interesting because I talked earlier about how when Jesus Christ was asked by his followers, what is, it wasn't his followers, as the Pharisees asked him, what is the greatest commandment? And he said, what are the greatest commandment? And he said, love your God with all your heart and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself, and the rest will follow. And Sigmund Freud, who I've studied, and I actually really respect Sigmund Freud. I don't think Sigmund Freud was a good guy. Sigmund Freud, and in his book that he wrote, Civilization and Its Discontents, he rants about the golden rule, about love your neighbor as yourself. And he rants about it. And he says that that is the source of all of this guilt and mental illness, because he says you can never really love your neighbor as yourself. You will never be in your neighbor's body. You will never feel your neighbor's pain. You can try your best to be empathetic, but you can never really love your neighbor as yourself. It's not actually possible, he says. And I hear that from Sigmund Freud, and I read that, and he's saying, oh, and all the guilt you're going to feel because you'll never be able to just love your neighbor as yourself. You won't ever be able to do it. He's not wrong. It's true. You will never be able to love your neighbor as yourself, right? You will never be able to completely and fully do it. But that's the point of life. It's about trying. It's about trying. That's the point. Yes, you're never going to be able to fully love your neighbor as yourself, but you're supposed to try. And it's when you try to care about other people. You try to live for the sake of others. You try to think of other people and how they might be hurt. You try to be compassionate. You try to give. You try to sacrifice for what's right. You try. That's what makes the world a better place. And if you just say, oh, we'll never be able to do it, you're missing the point. You are completely missing the point. And that point stands in relation to communism. Because let me see if I can find it. The Russian president, Vladimir Putin, when he spoke at the World Youth Festival, right, he actually made a very interesting point. He actually said something very, very communist at the World Youth Festival. I want to put it on. I was sitting at the World Youth Festival, and I actually wasn't in the auditorium because I was in the place where we were going to ask him questions, right? So I wasn't in the auditorium when he said it. I was watching it on a screen, waiting for him to come into the room for the reception where we got to talk to him. But I want to put the way Putin ended his speech at the World Youth Festival was very interesting. You know, Putin is not ideologically a Marxist-Leninist, okay? He's not, right? I mean, and I don't claim that he was one. I don't want to pretend that he was. He's not, right? I mean, he was at one point. He was in the KGB. But Putin politically has, he's evolved and adapted. He's a Russian Orthodox Christian. I believe in his views. He is. But let me find the. Here's the speech, right? And it was a very short speech that he gave at the World Youth Festival. But we'll put it on. It's only 3 minutes, so I guess we can listen to the whole speech. You know what I mean? But I want, because it's not that long, but it's the end of the speech that actually reminds me of that whole thing, because it's like, of course, yes, you can never really love your neighbor as yourself, but that's not the point. The point is that, well, anyway, I'll put it on. I'll let you hear it from him, because it's like people are missing. People get caught up in the details and they miss the essence, right? People get caught up in the legalism and they get caught up in the little rules and they miss the essence. Right? It's about the essence. It's not about the details, right? So many things in this world, people get caught up in the details and they miss the essence. They miss the essence. So just waiting for this clip. It's not very long. It's 3 minutes. It should download very quickly, but I will show you this. Putin is an amazing anti-imperialist. Putin is, when people, I'll just say this while we wait. When people ask me, Caleb, is Russia communist? Well, it's not led by a communist party. The state ideology is not Marxism, Leninism, so it's not communist in that sense. But let me ask you, when a country is cut off from the world imperialist economy, right? When the USA and Britain and France and Germany have blockaded them, and their biggest trading partners are communist countries like China and Vietnam and Cuba, when their biggest ally in the war is Belarus, whose leader calls himself a Marxist-Leninist, Alexander Lukashenko calls himself a Marxist-Leninist, when they build a monument to Fidel Castro, when their economy is centered around publicly controlled natural resources, is Russia communist? They don't call themselves that, and so I'm not going to call them that. But why does it matter? Right? If a country is clearly part of the global anti-imperialist camp, is clearly aligned with the really existing socialist countries, is at odds with the imperialists, like, how would it be different if it was communist? Right? And they say, oh, well, there's inequality in Russia. There's plenty of inequality in China, my friend. Let me tell you about China. There's loads of inequality in China. They say, well, how would Russia be different if it was communist, right? It's not the Soviet Union anymore, but communist countries are not the Soviet Union anymore. That's not the way communist countries are anymore. I don't want the Soviet Union to come back. right? The Soviet Union had problems. You need a market sector. You need market innovation. But anyway, let's put Putin on. Let's put Putin on. All right. Hold on.
Что приходит в голову, это то, что, несмотря на то, что мы выглядим по-разному, вот достаточно посмотреть на тех вот молодых людей, мы все... Спасибо, ребята.
There's no translation on this, is there? Wow. Well, there you go. We waited all that time for the speech to download, and there's no translation. Anyway, all right. There we go. So let's find one with translation. All right. Wow. That's kind of the night we're having, isn't it? I'm going to put it on because it's amazing, right? Let's put it on, right? I have shown the clip on here before many times, so I don't know why I'm having trouble find it. But yeah, I want to make sure I put the right clip on. It was a great speech that he gave. Let me see if I can find it. Okay. Alrighty. Boom, ba-dum. Maybe I won't be able to find it. I don't know. This is wild. Wild night. Thank you all for being here with me tonight. I had a lot that I needed to say tonight because I have spent a lot of time. It infuriates me to no degree that I am persecuted so much by people who claim to agree with me because I far more sincerely believe what they claim to believe. It doesn't make any sense to me, right? It really doesn't make any sense to me. It does make sense, but it's infuriating. The way I have been subjected to smearing and, it is just really infuriating to me. I'll be honest with you. It really is, because I have given so much of my life to this movement against imperialism. And instead of appreciating that, all the people who claim to agree with me hate me more. Every time I do something for causes that they claim to believe in, I get even more scorned and hated. And I really don't get it. Right. It honestly frustrates me quite a bit. It gets under my skin, honestly, because I sincerely believe in what I'm doing. I am an anti-imperialist, and I don't just talk about being an anti-imperialist. I became an RT reporter to promote anti-imperialist news. I risked my life going to Yemen because I believe in anti-imperialism. I wanted to stand with the people of Yemen. I've led American delegations to the World Youth Festival. I have done so many things for anti-imperialism. And every time I do one of those things, these people that don't do any of these things, who claim to also be anti-imperialist, hate me more. And it really gets under my skin, folks. It's like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy, but it's just like, I don't know. The more you do if you're genuinely anti-imperialist, you should appreciate the anti-imperialist work that I do. It's that simple. Right? If you're genuinely anti-imperialist and I go out and do something that helps build a world movement against imperialism, you should be happy that I did it. Right? Is it that hard to understand? It shouldn't be that hard to understand. And if these people were sincere in their anti-imperialism, they might say, well, I don't agree with this that Caleb did. I don't agree with that Caleb did. But you know what? He's opposing the imperialists, and that's fine by me. But they don't say that. They absolutely do not say that. No. Right? Every time I go out and do more for anti-imperialism, the response of these other anti-imperialists is to hate me even more than they already do. And it is, no one has been as badly canceled as I have. You know, and it is just infuriating to me. And thank God for all of you, you know, but it's just like the memo has gone out that I am a bad person. I'm no good. And there's no substance to any of this. And they've come at me with every different angle they can think of. And it's just like, you know, guys, you all believe supposedly in the same shit that I believe in. So why am I such a threat to you? You know, I mean, you know, hey, you know, if you all think China is part of Taiwan, you know, and I confront the so-called president of Taiwan on the street, shouldn't you all be happy about it? Right? I did that. You know, if you all support Russia and Ukraine, and I'm a reporter for Russian news and cover their UN meetings, shouldn't you all think it's great that I'm doing that? Yeah, I did that. Here, we'll put that on while we wait for the other video to load, right? You know, I mean, I have done, my record as an anti-imperialist is a mile long, and they just hate me more. They just hate me more. It absolutely infuriates me. You know, but there you go. Yeah, here we go.
Does not represent what the American people want. All the polls show that the American people don't want a new war. The American people are sick and tired of our money being wasted on bombs and weapons and destruction, provoking a war with China, provoking a war with Russia, while our trains are derailing, people in the United States are suffering, our water's not being purified, our railroads are falling apart, our power grids are falling apart, and yet we pour more and more weapons and money into some stupid confrontation with China. China is not our enemy. Wall Street bankers are our enemy. No more provocations against China. China is not our enemy. 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 Get out of our country. Stop trying to sell war in our country. Stop trying to sell war in our country. We don't want a new war with China. We love America and we don't want a new war with China. China is not our enemy. Stop trying to sell war. Get out of our country. Stop trying to sell war. China is not our enemy. I'm a patriotic American. I love my country and I don't want World War III.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great move. Right. And if you actually don't want war with China, you know, and if you actually, you know, are an anti-imperialist and you actually support China and you know, wouldn't you support that? But for some reason, none of these people on the internet that support China, none of them would share that clip. They all just pretended they haven't seen it. You know, they all boycotted it. Right. And they all, you know, and it's like, where were they? They could have done that. Right. You know, same with the Uhuru movement. Right. All these people say they're against prosecuting the Uhuru movement. I didn't see anybody but Jill Stein and Charles Barron and the Center for Political Innovation out in front of that courthouse. Where were they? I didn't see a representative of any of these other communist groups out in front of the courthouse, right? When I was out in front of the courthouse in Florida, and I'm headed back to Florida, it looks like. I'm going to be there for the sentencing, right? I want to support them. I mean, if they send them to prison, God forbid, I want to be there to support them. But, you know, I mean, where were they? Right? If they support the Uhuru movement, I didn't see them. I didn't see the PSL in front of the courthouse. I didn't see the ISO. I didn't see the QWH or the XYZ. None of these groups that claim to support the Uhuru movement. I didn't see any of them out in front of the courthouse in Florida. And I confronted one of these groups. You can probably guess which one. And I said, why weren't you there? And they said, oh, we don't have enough money. I said, really? Really? You don't have enough money? That's funny because one of your people has hundreds of thousands of subscribers on Twitter and on YouTube. he could probably pay for at least 4 people's plane tickets, with a week of ad revenue on his YouTube channel. So I don't buy that. You don't have enough money, right? I don't buy that, but they didn't do anything for the Uhuru movement because they're just building an internet fandom. And in fact, one of them basically told me on the phone they support prosecuting the Uhuru movement. He said to me on the phone, they're horrible, when I brought up how they're being prosecuted. And I said, we have differences with them. And he said, oh yeah, they're horrible. And I said, all right, this is where the phone call ends now. They don't support them, right? And also, just so you all know, the hate campaign against me personally, that's what it's about. The reason PSL has labeled me a Nazi, and that is not just a hint, that is not just a dog whistle, right? It's not just a dog whistle to encourage people to be violent. It's so if the government comes after me, which they're doing, they're coming after Scott Ritter, they're coming after the Uhuru movement. If the government were to come after me, the idea was to make sure that nobody spoke up on my behalf. That's what Brian Becker is trying to do. Brian Becker is trying to put me in prison, basically. Okay. Now, and you'll say, oh, that's crazy, Caleb. Really? It is. It's crazy. Well, he's doing it to the Uhuru movement. He tried to cancel their rally last year, right? They had a rally, as they're facing indictment from the federal government. He tried to mess with their permit and get their permit pulled to prevent their rally because they're competition. He wants to be the king of communism, right? So he's fine to see the Uhuru movement go to jail. Then he can be the king of communism. And this other group basically told me the same thing on the phone. This is unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable what these people are doing. I mean, these people are not communists in any conceivable way. And it's like they say, oh yeah, we're for solidarity. No, they're not. They're for solidarity when it's trendy, right? And they left the Uhuru movement out to dry. They completely left the Uhuru movement out to dry. None of them were there. No matter, and every time I do something that's anti-imperialist that these people are supposed to actually believe in, they never promote it. They never talk about it. And it's just, these people are, and we just have to stop calling ourselves communists because communism attracts evil people, right? I mean, these people are attracted to communism. The overwhelming majority of people in America that are attracted to communism are attracted to it because they want that. They want that. Okay, let's just be real. And that's why they don't care about Marx. They want to read bell hooks, right? They want to read Judith Butler. They don't give a fuck about Marx. What does Marx have to do with that? They want to read that. That's what they want, right? They want to let everyone know that they hate white Christian cessed males and they want to, they want their baby to have diarrhea all over the canvas. And, that's what they want, right? And I'm not even interested in people who want that. If you want that, I'm not even interested in recruiting you. But there is a small minority of people that are at least smart enough to kind of think that they want that. But those people are also fucked. And the reason that they're fucked is because most of them have issues with their fathers, right? They want to be the Stalin, right? They don't really care about defeating anti-imperialism. That's why they threw Uhuru under the bus. They don't really care about China. That's why, about many issues. They kind of think they like this, and they're a very small minority. We're talking less than 300 people at the most. And don't let social media fool you. There's less than 300 of them. And they think they want that, but when it really gets down to it, they want to prove something to their dad, right? They want to prove to their dad that they're, I'm an important person. I'm the head of human resources. I'm on the Politburo. They don't really give a fuck, right? They don't really give a fuck. And they're fucked in the head also, right? And it's the same thing. They want to kill Superman, right? Maybe they want to kill Superman with different aesthetics, but they still want to kill Superman. We've got to move away from the word communism because in America, communists are either this or some variation of that. And we don't want that, right? And the American people are never going to join a mass movement for that, ever. They are just never going to do it. Right? They are never going to join a mass movement for that. And honestly, I don't want that either. Right? I want this. I want that. I want to join a mass movement for that. And I think that the overwhelming majority of the American people want that. That is what the overwhelming majority of the American people want. They want that. That is what the overwhelming majority of the American people. They would never in a million years call it communism. That's not what communism means to them, but that is what they want. That is what we're fighting for. Don't you ever forget it. That is what we are fighting for. That is what we are fighting for. And if you want to call that communism, you want to call that socialism, you want to call that Christianity, you want to call it Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, that's what I'm fighting for. That is what I'm fighting for. And I am fighting for children looking to the future. I'm fighting for physical fitness and strength and pride in who you are, breaking the chains of colonialism, breaking free from the system of imperialism. We are fighting for all the children looking to the future. That is what I am fighting for. Right? And I don't care what you call it. And if you're fighting for something else, and if this image offends you somehow, right? If it offends you somehow, right? I don't care if you call yourself a communist or a socialist or an orthodontist or a dentist or an ophthalmologist. You're on my side, right? If you're fighting for this and not for this, I don't care what you call it. I don't care what label you give yourself. I don't care what Marx quotes you throw at me. I don't care what bullshit you have to justify it. If you're fighting for this and not for this, you're not my comrade. And if you're fighting for this and you want this, you are my comrade. And I can teach you how we can get it. Because only with socialism and anti-imperialism can we get this. And you may not realize that. And that's my job. I'm here to teach you that. I'm here to teach you that. So there we go. All right. All right. All right. All right. So let's see if I can get this quote.
Fast.
All right. All right. Ba-dum-ba-dum. That's me, and it's after me. Okay.
This is the foundation of our life, something that we all have in common. We are all equal from the moment we are born, thanks to our mother and father. This is how people are born. There is no other way, even with modern technology. We are all born equal. But here comes the question, are we growing up, developing equally? Unfortunately, no. There are no equal conditions in the world for everyone, and that is the main injustice of today's world. Is it possible to secure equal conditions for everyone to grow and develop? I don't know. But what I do know is that we should all strive for this. Even the very fact of striving to make the world more democratic, more stable, balanced, and safer.
Yeah, that was what he said, was that even the fact of, he said, will we ever get to a completely equal world where everyone has equal opportunity? He said, I don't know, but just striving for it and working hard for it will make the world better. And that's the point. Yes, maybe you never will be able to love your neighbor as yourself. Maybe you will never be able to actually love your neighbor as yourself. But shouldn't you try? Shouldn't you try? And isn't that what a good coach does? They're always trying to get you to, if you're an athlete, right? If you're a runner, your coach is always trying to work with you to run even faster than you ran before. Right? If you're a weightlifter, your athletic coach is trying to get you to lift weights that are heavier than you've ever lifted before. And they're challenging you, and they're trying to get you to do better, trying to get you to overcome roadblocks that prevent you from performing optimally, right? So love your neighbor as yourself isn't a source of guilt. It's not a bad thing. Maybe you can't ever do that, but that should be the aim. To be selfless, to care for others. Right? That is what we should be trying to do, and we don't do that anymore. And, there's a need. We ultimately need a world where people are not indifferent to other people's suffering. We need a world where people are taught to care and value each other. That's what we ultimately need. So anyway, folks, it took me 2 hours and 45 minutes to say everything I said tonight, but I'm glad that you all are here with me. Names and locations, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations, names and locations, names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us? Who's with us? Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Denver in Minnesota is with us. Welcome, Denver. Hillary in Wales is with us. Jacob in Wisconsin is with us. St. Joseph in Missouri. Moonlight, California. Courtney in Northern Virginia. Batch in Arizona. Bendigo, David Fox. Rachel in Winder, Georgia. John McCarthy in Chicago. Penny Arcos in Minnesota. Ian Chester in England. Joshua in St. Louis. Alex in Brazil. Jenny in Cincinnati. Stephen Ann in Ringgold, Georgia. Denver, Colorado. Charlie from Ontario. Cleveland Pirate Alex. Joe in New Jersey. Jack in Pierce. Patrick in Maine. Alex in Novograd. Jose in Florida. Doug in Santa Barbara, California. Chris in Salt Lake City. Eric in Lockhart, Texas. Cleveland. Dustin Schlesinger. There we go. Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. We got a few Rumble rants. More than a few Rumble rants. We got a lot of Rumble rants here tonight. Valen in Seneca, South Carolina. Brendan in Palo Alto, California. Truth on Earth. Gabby in Chicago. Shout out to Gabby. Good stuff. All right. So I'm going to start answering people's questions because it's 11 o'clock and, Devin of West Virginia, Auckland, New Zealand. It's 11 o'clock and, we've been going for almost 3 hours already. Thank you all for being here. We've talked a lot about a lot of different things, and that's been good, right? Glad to be back. My strength is coming back. I've had allergies and a lot on my mind. Gandalf, the wizard of the Middle Earth. All right. Very good. Gandalf. All right. Okay. All right. So first super chat or Rumble rant. It's from Hempcar. He says, I showed your video of Kamala Harris laughing about jailing truant parents to a local Democrat activist on his Facebook. They said it was a deep fake. It's not a deep fake. It's not a deep fake. That's a real clip of Kamala Harris. That clip has been around for a long time. It is not a deep fake. I edited it significantly, sure, but it is not a deep fake. That is really Kamala Harris there. That is a real clip of Kamala Harris. That is not a deep fake. That's a conspiracy theory, right? He just sees Kamala Harris saying something and doesn't like it. So he just says it's a deep fake. Like, does he have any evidence it's a deep fake? That clip has been around for a really long time. It's quoted many different places. That is a real clip. It's just, I don't agree with it, so it must not be real. There we go. Are you familiar with worldbeyondwar.org and David Swanson's work? He says how the Kellogg brand pact is still in effect and should be made illegal. I think Hitler was charged with breaching it. Well, I am familiar with David Swanson's work. He did After Downing Street, and, he's an anti-war activist. He's very important. He goes back to the Iraq War days. I think he's a very, very important person. He does very good work, and he's consistently anti-imperialist. I will give him that. A lot of the people that were active during the Iraq War days are not, but there we go. So I'm not familiar. What is the Kellogg? What is it? The Kellogg brand pact. What is that? It was the Pact of Paris was an international agreement to outlaw war signed in 1928. Yeah, well, that clearly is not in effect. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of attempts to just make aggressive war a crime, right? That was especially with the UN, right? The UN Charter says you can't attack another country. So there you go. In June of 2021, Salvatore Garou sold his invisible sculpture titled I Am. The work only exists in the artist's imagination. The The buyer gets a stamped certificate in exchange for $18,000 of real money. That's called money laundering. I mean, that is weird, Penny. Look, many people have pointed out that the world of arts dealing is the main way the CIA launders money, right? Is that art is often, it's in the eye of the beholder, right? And so, I mean, it's like Hunter Biden is selling paintings like crazy. He's just a really good painter. All these people, it's not that they want a favor from the White House or anything. It's just Hunter Biden. I mean, he happens to be the son of the president, and, his paintings sell for like $1 million. What's wrong with that? I mean, it's so obviously, and that, the CIA launders money through art. I mean, and that's been, that's part of why they're involved. I think that's part of why they were promoting the Jackson Pollock and stuff and all of that. I'm sure they were inflating it as a mechanism for, funneling money to somebody to do their dirty work. Right. And that when I hear that, Penny, that sounds an invisible statue. I mean, they're just pushing the envelope there, but that's money laundering. That's what that is. That's somebody's getting paid off for something. That money's going to somebody to do something that they don't want on the record. That's what it looks like to me. Palestinians bring order and dignity out of chaos and oppression. That's why the Western Empire and Zionists hate them so much. Absolutely. And the strategy for working against the Palestinians has been to play different factions against each other, right? They created the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood to fight the communist leadership. And that led to Hamas, right? And that the Oded Yanan plan, play the Sunni against the Shia, right? People think imperialism is about forcing order. No, imperialism is about chaos. Posted Peace MAGA on SM. What's SM? David, who is a retired Air Force officer, called me serious as a heart attack warning. That material will get you on a list. I recommend you remove it immediately. Worrisome. That's interesting. Well, I don't know what that's about, but, why would that get you on a list, right? Only peace can make America great again. I don't know why that, I mean, there's a lot of things that'll get you on a list if that'll get you on a list. I'll just tell you that much. So, I mean, if that gets you on a list, there's a lot of things that are going to get you on a list. Let me just put it that way. I don't know, I mean, if only peace can make America great again, if you're too scared to share that, then I don't know what to say. There we go. Didn't SDS split into the Weather, Underground, and Progressive Labor Party? I heard Bernardine Dohrn was giving LSD before a key meeting that led to the divide and downfall and drugs as a weapon by Potash. Okay, so, all right. We'll just quickly break this down, and you can read about this in our new textbook, Out of the Movement to the Masses. We cover this. All of this is in chapter 3 on the history of the new communist movement. There's that, right? You can read about it in Out of the Movement to the Masses, the new textbook we have. So Students for a Democratic Society was like a liberal activist group started on college campuses. It was funded by the United Auto Workers Union, the UAW, but that was after the UAW kicked out all the communists and when they were cooperating with the CIA. They were running what was called the Solidarity House. And Solidarity House was it was like funneling money to trade unions around the world that were anti-communist. So the UAW was a thoroughly anti-communist group. But they were liberal. The UAW sponsored Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous March on Washington, the March for Jobs and Freedom. That was paid for by Walter Reuther and Walter and Victor Reuther, the Reuther brothers, the head of the United Auto Workers Union. And they arranged, they paid for the March on Washington that Martin Luther King did. They were liberals, right? And they advocated a national health service, and they were in favor of the civil rights movement. The United Auto Workers they paid money to set up a campus anti-war, a campus civil rights and pro-peace activist group. And they were liberals, basically. They were Democrats, and they had vague, they were for workers' councils in factories and it's some weird stuff. And they were very anti-communist. Communism was just as bad as capitalism, and they were for working class democracy. It was originally called Students for Industrial Democracy. Then they later changed their name to Students for a Democratic Society. It was the Students for Industrial Democracy. And became Students for a Democratic Society. Founding members were Tom Hayden, Michael Harrington, and others. And they were very quickly on every college campus. They were the liberal activist group on college campuses. And they had a ban on communists. But communists just started joining. The Young Communist League, right? There was the Young Communist League, which was the youth league of the Communist Party. They dissolved and they started their own youth group. It was called the W.E.B. Du Bois Club. And it was just W.E.B. Du Bois was a very famous African-American scholar. And W.E.B. Du Bois, he was an African-American scholar who was anti-imperialist and critical of capitalism and stuff. So they started the W.E.B. Du Bois clubs, and then members of the W.E.B. Du Bois clubs, since they weren't in the Communist Party, they weren't in the Young Communist League, they could join Students for a Democratic Society. It was the W.E.B. Du Bois clubs. There was the, and the progressive labor movement. They started an anti-Vietnam War group called like the May 2nd movement, and they joined it. And a lot of different communist groups joined Students for a Democratic Society. And after a few years, they had so many members and so much money coming in. They weren't getting funded by the UAW anymore, and they lifted their ban on communists. At one point, SDS claimed it had like 2 million members. Most members of SDS were just kind of hippies, people that were against the Vietnam War. But the leadership of Students for a Democratic Society, it was dominated by, there was a clique of people they were like the children of millionaires. They were all very wealthy, and they were like famous in the media. Mark Rudd was the guy who had led the student protests at Columbia University. Bernadine Dorn was a lawyer, right? And she was older, but she was a lawyer. And Bill Ayers was the son of the electric company that like has a state monopoly on electricity in Chicago, right? He's the heir of that. And Bill Ayers is from like a millionaire, multi-millionaire family. And there's a couple others, Jeff Jones. There's a couple others, and they were just a faction. They were the people in the leadership of Students for a Democratic Society. And then there was this communist group called the Progressive Labor Party. They were originally the Progressive Labor Movement, and they became the Progressive Labor Party. Progressive Labor Party is a lot like PSL, right? They were the communist group that was all over the college's campuses. They were the first communist group you would encounter, and they were very big and very visible, and they were very stupid, right? I mean, their politics was really kindergarten communism. Workers good, bosses bad, turn the gun, very simplistic. And then on all the key issues of the day, they were on the wrong side, right? The Progressive Labor Party, nominally, they looked just like a radical communist party. They would march around with pictures of Stalin and Mao and all that, but they didn't support the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers were like the main group at the time that was anti-imperialist, was organizing the black community, was being persecuted by the FBI. And they hated the Black Panthers because they said the Black Panthers were black fascists because they wanted to build a group of black people only. And, it's one thing to have criticism or disagreement with the Panthers, but they hated the Panthers. They got into fistfights with the Panthers. That was the Progressive Labor Party. They also, in Vietnam, the main issue in the Vietnam War was, the Vietnamese people had the right to control their own country. Well, the Progressive Labor Party said that the National Liberation Front of Vietnam were just as bad as the U.S. imperialists. They were the fake red bosses. They'd sold out the revolution. So they were against the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. So the two key issues at the time, the Black Panthers, they hated the Black Panthers. They were not real revolutionaries or whatever. And then they hated the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. So they looked like, and then they were stupid on top of all of it. Their politics was very watered down. They had a very effective black leader in New York City, a guy named Bill Epton, but they forced him out. And it was just, they maintained a very low level, dumbed down atmosphere, where they just kind of went around and said, yay, communism, yay, communism. And then they wanted all the students to get jobs in factories. All the students get jobs in factories, and they cut ties to China. When Richard Nixon went to China, they hated the Soviet Union. It was revisionist. And then China welcomed Richard Nixon, so they cut ties to China as well. China was phony. They were against all the communist countries. They marched around with pictures of Stalin, and they were like, yeah, we're super communist, but they were not aligned with anything that was really happening. They were not aligned with the Vietnamese. They were not aligned with the Black Panthers. Kind of like PSL, right? PSL hates Russia and is neutral in Ukraine. They dropped the ball. PSL supports the low-wage police state, right? They support vaccine mandates. They support censorship. They think that the Trump administration didn't go far enough, or the Biden administration didn't arrest enough people after January 6th, right? They're trying to sabotage Uhuru. But they're everywhere. They're this communist group that's everywhere, but just happens to be wrong on all the major issues. That's the Progressive Labor Party back in the 60s, and that's PSL right now, right? Big communist group that's everywhere and is wrong on all the key points, right? Just like PLP was wrong on the Vietnamese National Liberation Front, wrong on the Black Panthers. PSL is wrong on the war in Ukraine. They are wrong on police state repression and the low-wage police state, but they're everywhere. And if you're a young person and you're looking for a communist group, you will inevitably find the Party of Socialism and Liberation. So that was the Progressive Labor Party. So the people in SDS's leadership who didn't like the Progressive Labor Party, they wrote a manifesto basically saying they did support the Black Liberation Front, and they did support the Black Panthers, and they did support the National Liberation Front of Vietnam. And the manifesto was called "You Don't Need a Weatherman to Know Which Way the Wind Blows." So they became nicknamed the Weatherman. That's a song from a Bob Dylan. That's a line from a Bob Dylan song. I'm getting tired here. Because of that, what is it called? The Progressive Labor, or the Revolutionary Youth Movement, they were Revolutionary Youth Movement, known as the Weathermen. But there was a difference among them, which is the leaders of the Weathermen, Bernardine Dohrn, Bill Ayers, they believed in a couple different things. One of their main beliefs was that counterculture hippies were the basis of the revolution. That, like, counterculture young people who did drugs and had long hair would align with Black people against the American government, right? They didn't believe in the white working class. They believed in counterculture youth. And they also believed in left adventurism. They believed in going out and breaking windows. They called them kick-ass marches, where they would smash windows and they would get into fistfights. And they believed in adventurous street fighting, and they believed in counterculture stuff. They had some bizarre sexual beliefs too. They believed monogamy should be smashed, right? They had smashed monogamy. It was wrong to have only one sex partner. They had some pretty insane beliefs, and they believed drug use was revolutionary. And a lot of the people in Revolutionary Youth Movement didn't agree with them, right? So you had what was formed called Revolutionary Youth Movement 2, and Revolutionary Youth Movement 2 rejected the terrorism and left adventurism. The Weathermen were they were the leaders of SDS. They were originally part of the Revolutionary Youth Movement, but then their line was that they embraced the counterculture, they embraced left adventurism and terrorism and such. So then Revolutionary Youth Movement 2 formed the basis of what's called the New Communist Movement, which was the people that rejected both Progressive Labor Party, and they also rejected left adventurism and terrorism, and they wanted to build a new communist party. And I trace my political lineage back to Revolutionary Youth Movement 2, right? I mean, I was in the Marcyites, the workers' world, for a long time, but really I take some from their legacy, but really my political lineage goes back to the Revolutionary Youth Movement 2 and to William Z. Foster and the Communist Party. That's my political heritage, right? Marxism was certainly a big influence on me, but Revolutionary Youth Movement 2 that rejected the counterculture, that rejected left adventurism, and wanted to build a real base among the population. Those groups, they were trying to do the right thing. They were not successful because the time period wasn't right. The bulk of the American working class didn't want to hear it. But they rejected kind of the satanic appeal of the Weathermen, which was a good thing to do. So there you go. All right. A comrade handed the book. We're still on. Okay, well, we'll get back to Rumble Rants. Well, I'll do this. A comrade handed the book "Do You Believe in Growth" to a Trotskyist. After reading the comment the comrade received was, "It was very tanky." Typical Trotskyist. That's just thought stopping, David. I mean, that's what you're taking from the pamphlet, right? We had a whole pamphlet about how growth is good, and about how, human beings want expansion, and how wokeism is a problem. And he takes from that, he defends communist governments. That's tanky. It's like, yeah, you're missing the point. You're really missing the point. If all you take out of this is he's a tank, I mean that shows you it's like certain people they can't listen to you, right? They get into this like thought stopping mode, right, where they can't listen to you, and it is infuriating, right? You know, you could read this pamphlet and you could say, you know what, I don't agree with China, I don't agree with the Soviet Union, but you're right about growth, right? But you know, I mean, and like this is revolutionary on a spiritual level. We're telling people humanity is good, growth is good. We're rejecting degrowth and pessimism. We're rejecting that satanic aesthetic. I am going to do another print of these very soon. We need this pamphlet to be everywhere. We need people to be reading this everywhere they go. This is what people need to be reading. I'm about to send some to Rachel out in Georgia. And anyway, but like there's a lot of people that are blocked, and I get really frustrated. When people are blocked, that means they can't hear you. They've got some hang up in their mind and they can't hear what you have to say. A great example was that Unholy Rome guy. He tweeted out, it just infuriates me to no end. He tweeted out, anyone who thinks that Marx and Lincoln had anything to do with each other is retarded. And I put below it, I just linked him. All the articles by Karl Marx supporting Abraham Lincoln, the letters from Marx to Lincoln, I linked him all that stuff. And he just starts putting below it, you're racist. The only difference between patriotic socialism is patriotic socialism and Nazism is the name, and there isn't a difference. And I'm just like, okay, dude, you don't have to like Lincoln. I mean, Lincoln clearly was very racist at one point in his life. W.E.B. Du Bois says he changed throughout his life, but it's like some things are true and some things are not. And all of his stupid fans, I mean, his fans are stupider than him. He said something that is historically inaccurate. I responded documenting facts, and they all, I guess he's just so cool, right? This is the problem with fandom. It doesn't become about what's true or what's not. It doesn't become about how we can change the world. He must be right, even though he's wrong, because he's just so cool. Like, he's just their favorite influencer. So he couldn't be wrong. This is how these people operate. It's like, it doesn't matter. Marx supported Abraham Lincoln. That is a historical fact. Did Lincoln do a lot of bad things? And sure. And we can have that conversation. But it's like facts can't get in the way of their historical narrative. Another guy, right? This guy drove me up the wall, right? I made a video you all saw about the Islamic Revolution of Iran. Here, we'll put it on, right? I think it's a good video. It's it's like 2 minutes long, right? I made this video about Iran, right? Right. Hold on. Let me just put it on. I made this video about Iran, just kind of an informational point. Why did the Ayatollahs come to power? Right? Not a huge, thing. I'm trying to do more short videos now. So I did this video about the 1979 revolution of Iran. I'll put it on. So I think this was a decent video, right? It just gave some historical background on Iran. Here we go. The Islamic Revolution of Iran was a very pivotal event, led to the creation of the Islamic Republic, a country that is now at the center of opposing Israel throughout the Middle East region, one of the main opponents of American imperialism around the world. Now, why is it that at the time of the 1979 revolution in Iran, when many different factions were organizing, why is it that Khomeini and his followers were the ones that ended up taking power and leading the country? Well, that's because the main issue in the Islamic Revolution was anti-imperialism, was the fact that Iran had a huge amount of oil, and that oil was under the control of British and American oil companies, while the Iranian people were impoverished. Now, in the 1979 revolution, there were many different communist factions, but none of them were able to take power. Only Khomeini and the Islamic Republic was able to take power. Why? Well, that was because the communists had not been consistent in their anti-imperialism. During World War II, the Tudeh Party, or the Communist Party of Iran, had collaborated with the British when the Soviet Union and the British Empire invaded Iran to overthrow the Shah, who was aligned with the Nazis. And the Maoist communists of Iran, organized into the People's Fedayeen guerrillas, they were aligned with China.
And China was a huge supporter of the Shah. They saw the Shah's regime, the US-backed dictator, as an ally against what they called Soviet social imperialism. China welcomed the Shah's wife and family members and gave them heroes' welcomes. So because of the fact that the main Communist Party had collaborated with the British, and because of the fact that China was backing the brutal dictator in the name of opposing the Soviet Union, Khomeini and the Islamic revolutionaries, the Ayatollahs, they took power because they were the ones that were trusted, because they had been consistently anti-imperialist for decade after decade after decade. With their conservative Shia Muslim views, they had always consistently opposed the imperialists. And that's why they were trusted by the Iranian people. And that's why they lead the Islamic Republic today.
So I made that video. And this guy, who I guess is a LaRoucheite, he's a LaRouche follower, right? Below it, this is his response, right? He posts a link to an article showing that the British Empire had funded and backed the Muslim Brotherhood. And I mean, that's true. Yeah. And the American government, CIA, also backed the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood loves the West. And I said, the Muslim Brotherhood loved the West. It's a completely different factions. If you know anything about Islam, you know Khomeini and the Brotherhood are completely different entities. And he said, I don't know what's worse, PragerU, grossly oversimplified spin on things, or your rose-colored glasses version. Like, dude, the Muslim Brotherhood is a Sunni faction. They are Sunnis and they love the West. They say that America is more Muslim than the Muslim world is because we have battered women's shelters and they believe in the free market and all of this. And they're Sunnis. Khomeini and the Islamic Republic of Iran say that capitalism is haram and violates their teachings. They say not capitalism, but Islam, and they're Shias. They're not the same group, dude. And he just keeps coming at me. And I'm like, dude, you can yell, and he just keeps tweeting, you're stupid, you're an idiot, and all this. Like, dude, you can call me every name in the world you want. That doesn't change the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood and the Shia Islamic Revolutionary Current are not the same. And he just keeps coming at me. The same as the Unholy Rome guy about Marx supporting Lincoln. Did Marx support Lincoln? Yes. Does that, if you want to hate Lincoln, fine, right? But some things are true and some things are not. Marx did support Lincoln, right? The Muslim Brotherhood, founded in Egypt in the 1920s, and Khomeini's Shia Islamic movement that took power in Iran in the 1970s are not the same thing in any conceivable way. They're not the same. They don't like each other. They don't allow Sunni mosques in Iran. Sunnis have to pray in Shia mosques in Iran. Like, guys, things don't stop being true. And it's like these people, they don't care about what's actually true. It's like facts can only be acknowledged if it fits your feelings. Okay, this guy wants to hate Iran, right? Because he's reading LaRouche stuff from the 80s that says Saddam Hussein was right in the Iraq-Iran war. So he wants to hate Iran. Why would you as an anti-imperialist today want to hate Iran? I don't know. That's what he wants to do. He wants to hate Iran. So he posts me something about the Muslim Brotherhood. Has nothing to do with Iran. That's a group started in Egypt with completely different religious beliefs. And I said, that's not relevant to the conversation. And he just keeps going on. You're stupid. You're too academic. You're just like PragerU. Like, dude, I've been to Iran. I made a movie about Iran. And this is how people on the internet are. Unholy Rome, the same thing, right? Anyone who thinks Marx and Lincoln had anything to do with each other is retarded. Well, I mean, I guess that makes you retarded if you understand world history because, and it's like, I get it. You want to hate Lincoln. You want to hate patriotism. You want everyone to know that you're so revolutionary and whatever. Fine. You have the right to do that. But I'm not a bad person for pointing out that Marx and Lincoln actually worked together. And it's like, there's no And what bothers me is not, I guess, what bothers me is not that these people are this dumb. What bothers me is that there are people that are like fans of theirs that like cheer them on. Why are you cheering for someone who is denying historical reality and calling me a bad person for pointing out historical reality? Like, this doesn't make any sense. It's absolutely infuriating. But anyway, I need to get back to the Rumble rants, right? I need to get back to the Rumble rants. So anyway, so then Penny Arcos, shout out to Penny, she's out in Minnesota, says, do dissidents discussed falling birth rates in Western nations since the 1970s despite economic incentives? Pollution affects sperm count. Culture promotes careers and double income, no children families, but immigrants multiply. Well, lower income people tend to have more children. That is just statistically true. Part of that is that if you grew up with a certain living standard, you generally don't want to have kids until you can give them that living standard. So if living standards are dropping, you're less likely to have children. Whereas if you've always been low income, if you grew up low income, you have kids, you're low income, you don't care, right? It's kind of a weird thing. People often, if they grew up with a higher living standard than they have when they're an adult, they don't want to have children, and they think if they work hard enough they can get it, and they often don't. And that's part of it. The other thing is that there's kind of culturally speaking, right? I mean, I'm a childless adult. I'm never going to have children. I realize that, I mean, on some level, I'm sad about it, but on another level, it is what it is, I mean, whatever, I'm never going to have children. Part of me wishes I could have children, but I can't, and it is what it is. But, I think that culturally speaking, working class people of all nationalities, low income white people, black folks, Arab Americans, Latinos, there's more of a culture of having children, right? It's just seen as something you do. Whereas, more middle class cultures, more middle class layers don't want to have children. So there's a lot more to it than that. But ultimately, there is an anti-natalism campaign like you wouldn't believe. I mean, the ruling class just says there shouldn't be any children. So there you go. There you go. All right. Another one here. SM equals social media. Dad is retired Air Force intelligence. He warned me not to mess with CPI promoting that ideology, or I could get on a list. Oh, well, there you go. I am on lists. I know that. So there you go. Is that a compliment? And promoting that ideology. What ideology would that be? Right? What ideology would that be, Violent Fembot? Right? Because we don't call ourselves communists anymore. We're innovationists. I mean, is innovationism on that list, Violent Fembot, or is it just I mean, look, I was an RT reporter. I mean, I'm still an RT reporter. I just can't work because of the new sanctions. Hopefully that changes. I'm still whatever. I'm still an RT reporter as far as I'm concerned, and I'm still in touch with them, and we're figuring out different options. But I can't go on the air because of the new sanctions. But I've been an RT reporter for 8 years. I know that there's a room in the Pentagon where they watch RT all day. So they know who I am. Oh, and they've made it clear to me at the airport and in other ways. They know who I am. And that's why I'm not doing anything illegal, which also, that's a reminder. If you're wanting to do anything illegal, don't do it around me, right? CPI exists to be a purely legal educational organization. We don't advocate left adventurism. We don't engage in any illegal activities. We're also not foreign agents. We're not agents of any foreign power. We advocate for America, so... but yeah, they see that real news all day. I am sure there's a room in the Pentagon where they do nothing but watch RT all day. So they know who I am. Right. And I mean, you saw me at the State Department arguing with them and pissing off John Kirby and Mark Toner and all of that. So yeah, they know who I am. They know who I am. Again, you would think all these anti-imperialists would respect me, but they don't, right? All these people who claim to agree with me hate my guts and want to see the government go after me. Right. I mean, it's, there you go. All right. All right, so we already did that, and that's just a block, David. That's a block, right? That meant he saw that this pamphlet supports the governments that he doesn't like, and he just said, Tanky must not read, and he didn't read it. And it's sad, because he's blocked, because, one of the people, the whole thing in here about how you can only reach the higher stage of communism with vast abundance, who actually emphasized that point a lot in his pamphlet, Revolution Betrayed? Trotsky. That's actually one thing that Trotsky was kind of right about. Trotsky actually did emphasize that you can't have full communism without vast abundance. Now, he used that point to attack the Soviet Union and stuff, but he said that a lot. So no Trotskyite should ever believe in degrowth. And in fact, one of the reasons that Trots said the Soviet Union wasn't socialist is they said to be socialist, you have to have a higher level of productive forces than capitalism. And they said because the Soviet Union was still catching up with the imperialist West, it wasn't really socialist. So no Trotskyists should believe in degrowth if they actually read what Trotsky said. But they don't read what he said. They just are attached to the spiritual essence of what he said, which is permanent revolution, tear it down, burn it down, none of this socialism in one country garbage, right? Trotsky spiritually was satanic, right? He was that satanic spirit of the left, right? And that's why he hated socialist realist art. I just spent the opening talking about Superman and all that. I mean, Trotsky hated socialist realist art under Stalin. He hated it, right? Go read Trotsky's writing on art. He wanted art that promoted violence. He wanted art that spread violence all over the world. That's what he wanted. He did not like social realist art. He did not like the Soviet family. He didn't like a lot of things. Can you please talk about the links between the anti-Marxist, anti-Christian pseudo-mysticism of Crowley, LaVey, and neoliberal capitalism? So, it's interesting. So I, for a long time, I just never. So let me just back up. We'll talk about this for a little while, right? We got a couple more super chats left. Keep the super chats rolling in. But, for a while, when I was a kid, right, I grew up in a very religious, conservative area, right, where witchcraft, we couldn't have Harry Potter in the school library because it was witchcraft and somebody might get it from the school library and learn witchcraft or something. And I don't know. It was and I grew up around very, very conservative religious people, evangelicals. And then my dad is a scientist, biologist. His background is science, big fan of Charles Darwin and such. So he was somewhat of a skeptic, right? So I grew up thinking that there were people like the religious folks I grew up around, and there were people like my dad. And my dad, of course, he made fun of UFO people. He made fun of, witchcraft, fortune tellers. He thought it was all a bunch of malarkey. So it wasn't until I got to college, I realized that there was this whole other layer of people that I was missing. What you call the occult or mysticism. That is something that is actually very prevalent, but it was just like a blank spot. I knew religious skepticism and, kind of the scientific skeptic community. And I knew the evangelical Christian community. I did not know the occult, right? And the occult, I learned when I went to college, especially for Catholic teenage girls, it is almost normal that they have a Wicca phase, right? If teenage girls are Catholic and they live in the suburbs or they're anywhere, it's because the Catholic Church, women can't be priests and, they're against birth control. And because of that, Catholic teenage girls get into Wicca for a while because Wicca presents itself as a feminist form of witchcraft. And, it's a thing. People go see psychics, fortune teller, all that stuff. I just had a blank spot for that. I just assumed nobody did it because my dad was a religious skeptic and he didn't do it. And the people I grew up around that were all evangelicals, they certainly didn't do it because it was sin. So I didn't know about that. Right. And it wasn't really, it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I read a biography of Aleister Crowley because I was fascinated. I was fascinated by it because I had just never, I didn't know that this third layer of mysticism existed. But I also was starting to realize that the weakness of communism was that communism was kind of part of that circle, right? Freudian psychoanalysis and occult mysticism and Marxism and leftist ideology all kind of occupied the same space of like salon culture. As capitalism emerged, you had a capitalist class of very wealthy people who owned the means of production. And a lot of them did not have to work because they had so much money and they wanted to be entertained. And so one way to be entertained is to sit down on the couch with Sigmund Freud and he'll help you, discover your true desires and your true feelings. Another way to be entertained is to discover a revolutionary ideology to build the world anew and learn lectures about how we can build the revolutionary movement. And another way to be entertained as a rich person is to, go learn all about magic and the new age and talk to dead people and all of that stuff, right? And that Marx, to his credit, was trying to get socialism, which was kind of a middle-class indulgence, to be the ideology of the labor movement. And he was successful in doing that. That was really Marx's contribution. Marx and Engels, if you read Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, they're basically saying we need to be the ideology of labor unions, not the ideology of people trying to make the world, better based on moralistic sentiments, right? Utopianism was a trend, and they're saying we need class struggle, we need the labor movement. And so, that was the basis of Marx, but it was still in that same space. And so as I was critiquing, what you call like anarchism and the libidinal impulse, I was reading about psychoanalysis and I was reading about occultism, and a lot of occult stuff is very fatalistic. A lot of it is very much backward looking. It says that we got away, there was some ideal way of being, and we got away from that. We need to return to the pure way. A lot of occult stuff, in its essence, if you really look at the essence of what they're saying, and again, I'll say this, and then somebody will get like, no, there's this occult thinker who says blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah. But I'm telling you, the essence of what a lot of occult ideology is saying is that we need to go backward, that growth is bad, and we need primitivism, right? And that a lot of occult stuff has an underlying degrowth, pessimistic narrative, right? A lot of it does. Now, that's not all of it, right? And that there's there's different interpretations. For example, there's like socialist feminist Wiccans, and there's all kinds, but the essence of a lot of that occult stuff is we need to have a giant orgasm, right? That the world is corrupt and people are not pure and all that. So we need to have some big, gigantic explosion, and that'll bring the world back into balance with nature, and that we'll have, that's what they believe, right? And that we just need this big libidinal release, and that'll reduce, they basically want nuclear war, they want death. You read the Aquarian conspiracy, you read all of that. And that's kind of what anarchists want, and that's kind of what a lot of petty bourgeois ideologies want. They want the giant orgasm that leads to, and then we go back to being noble savages. I don't want that, right? And it kind of rejects historical progress. It has a pessimistic, negative view of mankind. Now, in particular, you asked about, Crowley, he started his own religion, which was called Thelema, and then there's like a society, OTO, I forget what it is. It's like Order Thelema, something or other, right? Now, someone told me that actually Thelema, it's more like masonry. It doesn't really, it's kind of like a club. It doesn't really put out an ideological message. But Anton LaVey, right, who was the Church of Satan guy, that guy was very, very much a Rand libertarian. He believed, he was opposed to morality as a concept, right? And his group, they did not believe in right and wrong, right? They did not believe, they were very much, a group that they believed in the Ayn Rand philosophy that says might makes right, that selfishness is a virtue, that compassion and kindness are weaknesses. They were anti-moralists, and that they promoted a neoliberal ideology, and that there's always been an element of the rich. And this is what's very interesting, right? A lot of people on the right, like Trumpers, QAnon kind of people, they feel like the rich are all Satanists, and they're half right, but they're levee Satanists. They're not literal Satanists. They don't believe in right and wrong, right? They believe compassion and kindness is for suckers and for weaklings, and they kind of make fun and they kind of laugh at the common people for being religious. For example, the Wall Street Bull. You know, on Wall Street, there is a giant statue of a bull, right? That's Baal, right? You know, the Wall Street Bull, right? Very famous. I'm gonna pull up a picture. All right, it's on Wall Street. I saw it many times, you know, and it's the golden calf. I mean, they put on Wall Street, they put a giant golden calf on Wall Street, and you look at it. I mean, and some people, like a lot, like it's almost universal among conspiracy theorists to say, well, that's the golden calf from the Old Testament, right? That's Baal, the satanic deity that the children of Israel were always sacrificing to. You know, that's Baal. And then people say, well, that's not Baal. That's like a stupid right-wing conspiracy theory. No, it is Baal. I would say it's Baal. You know, I would say it absolutely is Baal, right? I would say that it very, very much is Baal, but not in the way that they're literally Satanists that are literally worshiping some Old Testament deity that's satanic. No, they're making fun. It's like they're saying we don't want to be religious, right? They're saying that we think poor people who are religious are stupid because they believe in right and wrong, but we're the superior rich who don't believe in right and wrong. And so we're going to put a blatantly anti-religious symbol on Wall Street to just kind of flaunt how anti-religious we are, right? And that's what it is, right? And it's not that they are literally Satanists, it's that they are anti-moralists and they consider right and wrong to be a thing that stupid poor people do. All right? Stupid poor people think that right and wrong exist, believe in God, believe that, you know, you should treat people with respect, believe that you should be compassionate and kind. We don't believe that, right? So we're going to put a symbol that will offend them, on a kind of a coded symbol that will offend religious people. And it's like an anti-moral gang sign, basically. Right? That's basically what it is. It is an anti-moral gang sign. It is a statement of we don't believe in right and wrong. And there's a lot of that, right? There's a lot of that. When you look at New York City, when you look at the modern world, there's a lot of telling people that right and wrong don't exist. That making fun and poking fun at people who do believe in right and wrong. One of them that you can't tell me that this one isn't something, right? And I've talked about this on the streams before. This one creeps me out, right? And this is one that if you like people, this is a little bit more than that. Let me just put it that way. All right. And that, you know, that you look at this one, and I think there's more to it than that. And I don't think this one is just an anti-moral statement. I think this one is maybe something worse. I've written essays about this before, and I still honestly don't know what to think about it because it's very weird and it's very scary. And I'll just put this on. Many people have noticed that the Apple Store, right? The Apple stores look like churches, right? They look like temples, right? They have rows. They have glassy windows. They look like a cathedral or something like that, right? Many people have noticed that. That's not in and of itself the problem, right? But the aesthetic of the Apple Store with the big windows and the glass staircase and all of that, it looks like an old cathedral or something like that. Okay. But there's another layer to it. All right. So we'll pull up a picture of an Apple Store. Here's an Apple Store. All right. This is an Apple Store. Right? So look, it looks kind of like a church, right? You got the big glass windows, you got the rows of pews or whatever. But what is in the place of where the cross would be? an apple with a bite out of it. And what in Christian imagery is an apple with a bite out of it? That's the fall of man. Right? I mean, that's Adam and Eve, right? They ate the apple. They disobeyed God and they ate the apple. So the Apple Store, it looks like a church, but where you would have the cross, you have a symbol of the fall of man. Now think about that. That one creeps me out. That one creeps me out. And I don't know if Steve Jobs, Steve Jobs is the guy who came up with the Apple logo. And he said it was for the apple that fell on the head of Isaac Newton. And some people thought it was actually a mockery of Alan Turing, who committed suicide by injecting cyanide into an apple and eating an apple. Right? That Alan Turing killed himself. He was the father of modern computer technology, killed himself with an apple. And that he was kind of the hero of Steve Jobs, as that was a tribute to Alan Turing. But when, it's in the last 20 years, 30 years, they started building Apple stores that looked like churches. That creeps me out. I must say that creeps me out. Right? Yeah. So, I mean, just got to say, like, when I look at an Apple store, I mean, it looks like somebody somewhere is trying to dog whistle a satanic temple of some type, right? But then again, are they making fun of us? Are they just saying, you stupid working people that believe in religion, we're going to taunt you this way? This is like, we're kind of making fun of you. Or is it, there's kind of the, Marx called himself a Promethean, and there's the belief that, well, man was doing the right thing by eating the apple because we were asserting our right to think and question. It was like Prometheus stealing the apple. I don't know. Anyway, spent too much time thinking about it. But anyway, so there's that. All right. But anyway, yeah, I mean, the occult world is something I don't know much about, but a lot of it does have a primitivist thing, and a lot of it does push a might makes right individualist philosophy. A lot of it does. But there's other people who tell me that they follow it, and it doesn't mean that. Okay, I don't practice. I've never been to a Thelema service, and I have no interest in doing so, but, I can't speak for what their beliefs are. My understanding was that it promoted, what do you call it? That it promoted libertarian free market capitalism. Maybe I'm wrong. All right, next question. Can you ask about MK Ultra and its Phoenician Mesopotamian religious iconography, anti-leftist, pro-objectivist application? You lost me there. I know about Project MK Ultra. If you want to learn about Project MK Ultra, read The Search for the Manchurian Candidate and read The Poisoner in Chief. Search for the Manchurian Candidate by Stephen D. Marx is very good. Talks a lot about it. And so is The Poisoner in Chief by Adam Kinzer. There's a lot about MK Ultra that's out there, about how the CIA was trying to develop mind control. That basically they were freaked out during the Korean War that these young men were convinced to be communists in the POW camps. And so it was like, how could they change their worldview? And so they started experimenting with all kinds of brainwashing and mind control. And then that led them to the hallucinogen thing. And then that ultimately led to hallucinogens being introduced into the population overall. They were doing it on college campuses, and the LSD cult of the 60s and Timothy Leary and all of that came out of that. But I don't know about the Phoenician, Mesopotamian, Egyptian religious iconography. I had always understood that MK Ultra, they were kind of more interested in Asia, right? That they were interested in Buddhism, they were interested in Hinduism. I didn't know they were interested in Mesopotamia and stuff. So I don't understand this particular part, right? I haven't heard that. Black nationalists have always really liked ancient Egypt. That's been very important to black nationalists. But yeah, you lost me there. All right. Mark Halperin tells Tucker Carlson Trump win causes great mental health crisis in the USA. So I gotta just click the link for that story. Hold on. Let me just get the all right. Hold on. All right. So so this story is from 2024, October 16th. Journalist Mark Halperin told the Daily Caller News Foundation co-founder Tucker Carlson on Tuesday he believes the re-election victory for former President Trump would trigger a mental health crisis. Okay. I think there's already a mental health crisis. I'm not saying this flippantly. I think it will cause a great mental health. Tens of millions of people will question their connection to the nation, their connection to other human beings. People are already doing that. I think it would require an enormous amount of access to mental health professionals. People are already doing that. They did that after Trump won in 2016, and I was just like, you know what? Like for the majority of my life, gay marriage was illegal. Remember, Bush won the 2004 election because there were anti-gay marriage referendums on all the ballots. And I remember I was at the Republican convention in 2016. I went to both conventions, covered them for RT, and I was in the audience, and Trump said he supported gay marriage, and then the audience applauded, and then Trump said, "I am happy to see Republicans cheering for gay marriage." During the election, Donald Trump said that Bruce Jenner it wasn't Bruce Jenner, it's Brianna Jenner, or I don't know, what's Jenner's name? Caitlyn Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner can use whatever bathroom they want. Like Trump seemed like the most pro-LGBT Republican I've ever seen. So, but yet I remember seeing after Trump won, all these LGBT people are going to kill themselves and I'm like, how are they going to why are they going to kill themselves? Right? Like, I don't get it. Like Trump supports gay people. Trump said Caitlyn Jenner could use whatever bathroom in his thing. Trump said, I'm so glad that Republicans are cheering for gay marriage. Like Trump is very, very pro-LGBT. I don't understand. Like you're going to kill yourself because Trump and it's like they're obsessed with Trump. Yeah, but they don't listen to what he actually says. I know that Pence, Vice President Pence, he was, I guess associated with, he promoted a kind of therapy where, like the parents hire a Christian therapist to like ungay their kid, which can be very traumatic. But like Mike Pence doesn't support Trump anymore. Mike Pence turned against Trump. Like, so I don't get it. I really don't get it. Like, it was like all these gay people are going to kill themselves because Trump won. Like Trump is not anti-gay. Like he's the most pro-gay Republican ever. I mean, I can understand there being a strong mental health reaction if Jerry Falwell became president, if Mike Pence became president, maybe, but like, what are these people like? It doesn't make sense to me. I don't get it. I just don't get it. I mean, I don't know. All right. I know it's not your field. What do you know about Lysenko? Well, look, I do know that epigenetics is a new field that basically so that Darwinian evolution says that there is no passing on of acquired traits. Your genes are the same when you're born, and what the genes that you pass on are the same genes you have when you're born, and they just mutate. Lamarck was he had his own theory of evolution, and he argued that you acquire traits throughout your life, and then when you procreate, you pass on those acquired traits to your offspring. That your genes change through your life; they're not set when you're born. And that Lysenko is accused of promoting Lamarckian evolution, saying that acquired traits like the environment could change the genes of plants or something like that. That's my understanding. And that some of the new research with epigenetics hints that there's more to that than we thought, right? They talk about, and I heard some stuff about this too, like elephants inherit memories from their parents, right? Like they can things like that, like that, that there is an element of what they call epigenetics. I don't know enough about it. I have no scientific knowledge whatsoever. And largely the Lysenko episode is pointed to as an example of like, oh, you can't have totalitarian control over science, right? That because Lysenko's theories about genetics were in line with the communist ideology he was promoted, even though it wasn't scientifically true, and that's how evil Stalin is. I'm obviously going to be suspicious of anything like that, but I'm also not a scientist. So I tend to, there are some weird things like that. I've talked about this on previous streams, right? There's this one, and like Harpal Brar, right, who I've interviewed on this channel. He has written articles defending Lysenko. Jyoti Brar, they say Lysenko was correct. I don't know enough about it. I can't say that. They maintain that Lysenko's science was correct, and the whole anti-Lysenko thing is malarkey. And there's articles in, I think, Lolkar, which was the Indian Workers Association newspaper, about Lysenko that make the argument. Yeah, Lysenko's great contribution to understanding of hereditary. You can read it, right? And this is them as, hardline Stalin Marxist Leninists. They say that Lysenko was correct. I don't know enough about it, and I don't, my assessment of the Soviet Union and their great achievements is not dependent on Lysenko having been correct or being wrong. I mean, he was a scientist in the Soviet Union, and there's debate. That's all I know. But this isn't the only field. When I was in the Workers' World Party, they expelled a guy named Mike Gimbel. Mike Gimbel wrote a book about physics. And he quoted largely from Dr. Eric Lerner, who used to be in the LaRouche labor committees. He's like a Marxist professor. He wrote a book called The Big Bang Never Happened. And that Mike Gimbel wrote a book similar to The Big Bang Never Happened, quoting from Eric Lerner, maintaining that the new physics is bunk, right? That there is no entropy, and that there is no beginning or end to time, and that the new physics that started with Einstein is really just religious mysticism. It's not actually based in science or mathematics. Now, I have no knowledge of any of that. I know nothing about it. So, I just don't know anything about it. I know nothing about physics. So, it's interesting. I read Mike Gimbel's book, and I heard his side of the story, and I basically learned his arguments. But other than that, I know nothing about it. I respect Mike Gimbel, though, right? A brilliant sports statistician, a self-made man, no college education, and became the main sports statistician of the New York Knicks. That's pretty. I mean, he was well respected in the field of sports statistics. He's a genius, right? I mean, Eric Lerner. So I am open to, I'm not going to discount what he said. I just don't know enough about it. So there you go. All right. And then the other thing is AIDS, right? There are a number of people who question the way, the narrative about how AIDS is transmitted, right? And that have said that the main thing in stopping AIDS from being transmitted is that you need the country to have a modern sewage system. And there are some people who've said that this is that AIDS, it's not about condoms, right? That the main thing with AIDS is that countries that don't have a modern sewage system, the AIDS virus grows in, the lack of modern sewage technology. I'm not going to expand further because it's gross, but the main factor, right, that is if the African countries where AIDS was spreading like crazy, if they got modern sewage systems, they wouldn't have the problem. But there's no money in that. Right. There's money in, AIDS awareness and AIDS research and all that. And that there was a very good, like an episode. Well, there's a number of people out there that question the AIDS narrative, that say that the way AIDS spreads and all that is we don't have it exactly right. And again, this is one of those things where if I open my mouth about it, I don't know what I'm talking about. And especially don't listen to me for medical advice. Don't go have sex with someone with AIDS. Well, Caleb said it's actually about the sewage. I mean, obviously don't do that. I don't know what I'm talking about. You know, but you know, that AIDS, that the way the AIDS virus is transmitted and all of that, it's more complicated than just, you know, the way we understand it, right? Um, and that the other thing is that, you know, and again, this goes to show you this kind of, I'll just say this: the Workers' World Party maintained that AIDS was a government conspiracy, right? They don't want you to know that now, and I'm sure they would deny that if you brought that up to them. But Leslie Feinberg, who was the first transgender activist, wrote articles in their newspaper in the 80s saying that AIDS was a government conspiracy. And you know who else said that? The Soviet Union and Iraq. And many people in the communist world believed that AIDS was a government conspiracy. And Cuba quarantined AIDS victims, you know, because they didn't know how it could be spread and they didn't trust the imperialist propaganda. And so did Iraq. And so did a lot of the anti-imperialist countries, you know, and that there was a lot of people. And that's one thing that people are like, they attack the LaRouche people over. They say, oh, the LaRouche people, they wanted to quarantine AIDS victims. Well, so did all the communist governments, and they actually did it, you know, and that's one thing, the LaRouche people, they're attacked. Oh, they wanted to quarantine the AIDS victims. Well, all the communist governments actually did it. So, I mean, are you going to denounce anyone who supports them? Cuba actually did it, you know. So I mean, that just goes to show you, and that's one thing where, you know, I mean, where they can kind of create hysteria around something. It's like, you know, now I guess you don't have to quarantine people with AIDS, right? People have AIDS. They're not going to cough on you. They're not going to, you know, spit on you and give you AIDS. Just not going to happen, right? Right? You know, AIDS, there has to be blood transmission, whatever. Okay. I guess. I don't know. But people didn't know that in the 80s. People didn't know. People just didn't know about how, you know, this virus could be transmitted. So anyway. All right. Next question. What is your view of Orthodox Christianity? I actually know almost nothing about it, right? I admire it. I mean, I admire the tradition of icons, you know, and I think that that's an aspect of, you know, when I was on this stream earlier, I talked about William Z. Foster. I basically, without realizing, I was practicing the mystical practice of ancestor worship, even though he's not my ancestor, I'm not descended from him. I was ancestor worshiping William Z. Foster. I was like summoning his spirit in the way that people in the East would talk, right? I like had a shrine to him in my little basement apartment in New York. I had all of his books underneath it. I would look at his picture. I would, you know, and that's called ancestor worship. And that's something that people do in Eastern cultures. That's what they do with icons, right? You know, in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, you have a bunch of icons of like saints, people that you admire, people that have done great things. So, but I really know nothing about Orthodox Christianity. I'll just be honest with you. I know nothing about it. You know, I know it's a big trend on the internet. Since the pandemic, there's been a lot of conversions to Orthodox Christianity. They talk about the Ortho Bros and, you know, Sunni Islam also, right? There's been a lot of people who converted to being Sunni Muslims and stuff. So there you go. All right. LaRouche organization today does not hate Iran. This guy was speaking for himself. Schiller Institute supports Iran being in BRICS. Cool. Yeah, great. Yeah, I don't know what that guy's issue was. I just, you know, it was just like, you know, I was just kind of using him as a bad example because it was like, you know, I know that I think in the 80s, the LaRouche organization maintained that Khomeini had been backed by the British Empire. You know, honestly, that there could be an element of truth in that because they feared a communist revolution. And I think, you know, Khomeini was living in France, I believe, until the Islamic Revolution. And it may have been that they said, all right, we'll have this guy lead the revolution, so it's not a communist revolution. Now, Iran ended up basically, you know, because of the Iraq invasion and a number of other factors. At this point, Iran is a very anti-imperialist state. But it wasn't very much. I mean, in the late 80s, early 90s, Iran didn't play a very revolutionary role. I mean, you know, Iran, you know, Iraq was kind of the main enemy of the United States at the time, and Iran was kind of backing into taking some pro-imperialist positions. So it's complicated. That's a nuanced issue. Is it possible that the British gave Khomeini support, thinking we'd rather have this guy than the communists take over Iran? That's very possible. I don't doubt it. And often we know how the imperialists are is they hedge their bets, right? They'll pay both sides, right? So they win. They bet on both teams, right? So the idea that Khomeini, who'd been given refuge in the West, may have gotten some support at the beginning. It's possible. I don't rule it out, right? I don't rule it out at all. I do know that the Islamic Republic is the center of anti-imperialism right now. And on that basis, I support them, right? And I've seen with my own eyes the great achievements of the Islamic Revolution, etc. So, that's that. You know what I'm saying? That's all there is to it. I mean, but and that's what bothered me about the guy was that I was not his overall narrative. I'm open to the idea that the British gave some support to Khomeini or whatever. Yeah, that's possible. But Khomeini is not the Muslim Brotherhood. And that's like, when the USA invaded Iraq, right? I remember I was a kid. USA invades Iraq after 9/11. I said, Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden are not the same, right? Osama bin Laden is a very, very conservative Saudi. Saddam Hussein is a Baathist Arab nationalist, a secular leader. They're not the same. And the response I got from people, all them Arabs are the same. They're all the same. They all hate us. They all hate us. They all hate Israel. They're all the same. No, they're not all the same. That's basically what this idiot was saying. This guy, he was saying, they're all the same. He puts up the Muslim Brotherhood to tell me Khomeini is a British agent. They're all the same. No, they're not all the same. That's a really ignorant thing to say. That would be like, if you didn't like, I'm trying to think of an example. If you didn't like something that a Russian Orthodox priest would said, you pulled up a picture of Reverend Fred Phelps, the Baptist guy who went around protesting gays. Look how Christians are. It's not the same, right? Some Russian Orthodox priest and Fred Phelps are very different from each other, right? Like all Muslims are not the same. All Christians are not the same. All Jews are not the same. An Orthodox Jew and a Reformed Jew are going to be miles apart in what they believe. You talk to a Hasidic Orthodox Jew, what he believes. You talk to a Reformed Jewish synagogue rabbi in New York City, what they believe are going to be like miles apart, right? If you talk to a Shia and a Shia like Khomeini, and you talk to a westernized Sunni like the Muslim Brotherhood, they believe very different things. And Wahhabis that are also Sunnis like Saudi Arabia, they believe different things as well. Right? All Muslims are not the same. All Jews are not the same. All Christians are not the same. And when he just, it's like, I made a video about Iran, and his response is to tweet at me an image of the British Empire funded the Muslim Brotherhood. That's really ignorant. That's a really, really ignorant thing to do, right? He did not make his movement look good. He did not make the LaRouche movement look good there. That's a really, really ignorant thing to do, right? Next time next time he posts something criticizing Kamala Harris, I'm going to post an image of the Crusades below it and be like, well, you know what Christians do. I mean, it's like that level of to him, they're not people, basically, is what he's saying, right? They're all just a bunch of towel heads. They're all that's what he's saying, right? Oh, Muslim Brotherhood, Khomeini, they're all the same. And then he won't back away from it, right? He won't go, okay, you're right. Khomeini is not the Muslim Brotherhood, but I think he was. No, he just doesn't back. And then he just starts going off on me. That's really racist. It's really offensive. I just, as someone who's been over there and someone who's studied these groups and these traditions, I didn't appreciate the way that guy was acting, and I'm not even saying that his initial point about the British Empire is necessarily wrong. I'm open to that. But I'm not open to saying that the Muslim Brotherhood is the same as Khomeini, because they're not the same. Sunnis and Shias are not the same. Ugh. All right. Eric Lerner does important fusion energy research. Yes, I interviewed him years ago. I went to his lab, actually, in New Jersey. I interviewed him about some of the collaboration on fusion energy he does with Iran. Fusion energy is the future. I think he's a great guy, and he's a very smart man. Right? He's clearly very, very brilliant. I mean, he runs fusion energy research for the state of New Jersey. That's very, very important. Very, very important stuff. So very admirable. Very admirable. All right, folks, listen, it is 12 after midnight, and we have gone almost 4 hours. We are 2 minutes away from doing 4 hours tonight. So I didn't stream for a while, and then I streamed for 4 hours. So there we go. Hopefully I have the energy to do this again tomorrow night. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to put on the closing music. Thanks for listening to me talk about Superman and tell some stories and teach you all about communism and stuff. But yeah, all right. I'll be back. New upsurge.
in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.